Chapter 181-Killer. Most of the day was spent like this. In the room, Li Ang looked at the Shaolulia Palace lying on the cushion with a smile on his face. The other party was obviously exhausted, and, for the first time, he felt the devastation of the storm from Li Ang, and it was quite terrifying to be able to persist until now. Sleep well. Li Ang leaned over and kissed Shaolulia Palace's white forehead, then pulled the quilt over his body. Maybe feeling something, Shaolulia Palace's long eyelashes trembled. After seeing Li Ang's figure, she shrank very safely and pulled the quilt to cover herself. Immediately, Li Ang walked out of the room and cleaned up the chaotic scene in the hall. After cleaning up a lot of things, lying on the sofa, the aftertaste is endless. Recalling the scene just now, his blood boiled. Sudden. Li Ang's eyelids jumped, his eyes narrowed slightly, and the corners of his mouth moved slightly. It seems that some interesting guests have come. His eyes looked out the window. Outside the window, above the sky, a scorching sun shines down. Who are the guests? He didn't know who these people were. But these people's hidden movements are quite skilled, and it is obvious that they are not ordinary people who come to him. In this case, the identities of these people are somewhat intriguing. Who is it? Li Ang's eyes flickered brightly, and he said with a smile. At the same time, behind him, two women in black clothes appeared, with expressionless faces, looking at Li Ang's back. For a moment, they attacked and killed with daggers. In addition, on the left and right sides of Li Ang, two men in black clothes appeared, holding daggers and attacking fiercely. Position in front. 6 men in black are walking step by step. On the ceiling, there were bursts of crisp footsteps, revealing it unabashedly. Have so many people been dispatched to deal with me? Li Ang was lying on the sofa, the corner of his mouth curled up, unmoved. He wouldn't think that this person came here to make a home with him. Even if he wanted to take care of his family, he wouldn't invite such a weird person. It's not a friendly gesture to come uninvited. Li Ang's extreme knowledge and domineering unfolded, covering everyone. In an instant, every move of these people could not escape his eyes and ears. There were 4 people on the ceiling and 12 people in the room. There were 6 people outside the house, surrounding the entire house, preventing anyone from escaping. A total of 22 people. Li Ang's eyes flickered brightly. This group of people was obviously prepared. Moreover, the target was him. When he made a shot, it was a fierce killer move, and he wanted to kill him. It's a pity. Li Ang smiled lightly, waved his hand, and disappeared on the sofa. The 2 female killers at the back, the daggers penetrated, but only hit an afterimage. And Li Ang himself was sitting on the other side of the sofa long before their attack arrived. With a smile, he said, "Who sent you here?" On the other side, no one responded. After sensing Li Ang's figure, a group of 12 killers attacked Li Ang again with a terrifying speed. In addition to their terrifying speed, they also have ghostly dodging abilities. This made Li Ang Jishi amazed, but these speeds were still in front of him, and they were still not on the table, and there was no pressure at all. Boom! A man in black slammed down with a punch, covering his armed fist, rotten the sofa, and a huge pit appeared on the floor. Chapter 181-Killer. NGT, page 1/2. Please click the next page to continue reading. A man in black slammed down with a punch, covering his armed fist, rotten the sofa, and a huge pit appeared on the floor. The smoke and dust rolled around, filling the surroundings. Li Ang glanced at the door of the room. The door was tightly closed, and the sound insulation effect was quite terrifying. In that case, I don't need to worry. The corners of Li Ang's mouth were slightly raised, and he smiled lightly. Seeing the color domineering envelop the audience. To prevent these people from taking away the Shaolulia Palace, he is domineering when he sees and hears, and always pays attention to the movement in the room, as well as the movements of the people on the ceiling. Once they appeared in the room of Shaolulia Palace, Li Ang would immediately kill these people. Nowadays BHBC playing with these people is also a good way to pass the time. I have provoked a lot of people into the sea, but your strength is not bad. If you can invite a killer of your level, your identity will naturally not be low. The pirates' side can basically be ruled out. They have never shot against me, and there is not much so-called hatred value. Then the only people left are the characters on the Navy side. It's just that warring states shouldn't be so stupid. It's obviously impossible to send you rubbish to assassinate me. Relying on his IQ, he won't give such an order. The world government will not issue such an order. Even if they want to do something to me, they will not send these wastes over. Then, the result is obvious, you are sent by the Tianlong people. Li Ang narrowed his eyes slightly, looked at the man in black in front of him, and said lightly. If I guessed correctly, this has absolutely something to do with him hitting Charles Rose Saint. Apart from this, the Tianlong people had no other reason to shoot at him. Because, no one knew that, in fact, it was he who captured Zaluria Palace. Only he and Zaluria Palace knew about this matter. The Tianlong people didn't know about this, and even so, they sent people to assassinate him, and there was only one reason. He recently severely injured St. Charles. It is because of this that the revenge of the Tianlong people will be aroused. Kill. A man in black shrank his pupils, his voice was hoarse, and he said solemnly. You guessed it right. Li Ang's face was full of smiles, seeing and hearing domineering shrouded the audience, all the things in these people's hearts, without exception, penetrated into his mind. What is certain is that these people are from the handwriting of Tianlong people. The world government does not take action. Instead, let the Tianlong people do it themselves. It seems that the world government and the Tianlong people are not as harmonious as imagined. A killer sent by the Tianlong people. Li Ang looked at the men in black in front of him and said with a smile. Sudden. A black figure appeared behind him, holding a samurai sword and stabbed Li Ang violently. Li Ang's face was calm, his right hand was covered with armed color. He opened his palm, grabbed the samurai sword, and looked at the man in black with a somewhat surprised expression. She's still a killer. But what about the female killer? Li Ang took the samurai sword away with a little force, took a good look at the samurai sword, and showed a smile. The quality is not bad. Back. The female killer's face changed dramatically and she quickly backed away. Li Ang held a samurai sword, covered with a layer of armed domineering, and cut it down with one sword. Call out. A sharp slash pierced the air and hit the front. Puff. A huge blood hole appeared in the female killer's chest, penetrating the wall behind him, piercing the wall through a hole. Ah! The female killer's throat rolled, unable to speak. From her mouth, blood spurted out. Gradually. Her eyes were scattered, her eyes turned white, she fell to the ground, and died on the spot. Chapter 182_assassination plus 999999. 22 killers, 1 died. He was instantly killed by Li Ang without any resistance. On the ground, the corpse of the female killer gradually became cold, the temperature dropped, and the blood from the chest flowed on the ground, polluting the air in the room with a bloody smell. The strength is not bad. Li Ang, holding a samurai sword, smiled calmly. Of Shichibukai, that is, at the level of crocodile. In terms of number, there are so many killers with strength similar to Chiwahai, even the 4 emperors will feel a little pressure. However, Li Ang felt that he could still warm up. Want to kill him? These people are far from enough. At least, at this level, tens of thousands of killers of this level would have to come to make him feel a sense of crisis. Just looking at it now, the remaining 21 killers can't even touch him at all. Whoosh, whoosh, whoosh. The position of the ceiling was punched through the hole. All the killers poured into the room. 21 killers were in place, ready to go, staring at Li Ang, and surrounded Li Ang alone. Kill. A middle-aged killer in black took the lead, holding a knife and attacking Li Ang from the front. Just as he was about to arrive in front of Li Ang, he suddenly disappeared. The next second, he appeared behind Li Ang. Li Ang's face was calm, holding a samurai sword and placing it behind his back. Boom! The two knives collided, producing bursts of fire. Li Ang didn't even look back, but with his domineering looks, he was able to observe every move of these people in a very subtle way. Holding a samurai sword, Li Ang turned his hand and waved a sharp slash. Call out. The bright light flashed away. I see. The black-clothed killer standing behind Li Ang covered his neck, his face full of horror, his eyes were full of disbelief, and he wanted to speak, but he couldn't. Ah! The black-clothed killer opened his mouth, and blood spurted out from his neck like a shower. He clutched his neck with difficulty, but he couldn't stop the flow of vitality. Finally, no matter how unwilling he was, he could only fall to the ground. Blood was flowing on the ground, the whole province was chilled. He let go of his hand, and the saber fell to the floor. Another killer was instantly killed by Li Ang and killed on the spot. The bloody smell was extremely strong, floating in the air, filling the entire room, making people sick. But the people here, everyone has blood on their hands. Naturally they won't feel any emotional fluctuations because of these scenes. These people are professional killers. No less than 1,000 people died at their hands. And Li Ang didn't need to say more. Every time he made a move, whether it was killing pirates or attacking the naval branch fortress, the total number of these people would definitely not be less than 10,000. 22 killers, with 20 remaining. The other two were instantly killed by Li Ang without any resistance. In such a situation, the remaining 20 killers had to be cautious. They dared not act rashly, and attacking at will only make them die faster. Don't be a coward, your mission is to kill me. So, no matter what you think, you still have to do it. Delaying time will be more detrimental to you. The corners of Li Ang's mouth were slightly raised, and he smiled lightly. He is holding a samurai sword, and the armed color is domineering and shrouded in the weapon. There is no need to be serious about dealing with these people. To make him serious, at the very least, the entire Navy headquarters must attack before it is possible to make him serious. Since you don't do it, I will do it. With a smile, Li Ang moved forward. Immediately, the 20 killers were tense and did not dare to be careless. Chapter 182-Assassination plus 999999. Immediately, the 20 killers were tense and did not dare to be careless. The pressure on Li Ang in front of them was too heavy. This has just started, and 2 people died. Even if there are 20 of them, according to this development, in less than 3 minutes, I am afraid that everyone will die. What about completing the task? Suddenly, Li Ang stopped, and a mechanized voice came from his head. Congratulations to the host, open the modifier, assassination plus 999,999. Open black lens bracket, comprehend that murder is invisible, close black lens bracket. Open black lens bracket, breakthrough novice, close black lens bracket. Open black lens bracket, breakthrough entry, close black lens bracket. Open black lens bracket, breakthrough proficiency, close black lens bracket. Open black lens bracket, breakthrough master, close black lens bracket. Open black lens bracket, breakthrough master, close black lens bracket. Assassination. Li Ang's mouth moved slightly, a little surprised, and then his eyes narrowed slightly. In his head, there are a lot of assassination techniques, all of which are killing techniques. There are countless ways to kill the weak. There are many techniques that he has never been able to know. Now, he has directly changed from a novice murderer to a master murderer. Compared with these people in front of him, the level is higher. If I had had these assassination techniques earlier, the battle with the Navy headquarters would have had no choice but to have Kizaru and Akainu, with an 80% chance, would kill me on the spot. Then, Garp and the Warring States can no longer stop my footsteps. Quote. Li Ang's mouth moved slightly, thinking in his heart. The assassination technique appeared too late, but fortunately, at least now, his strength level has been raised again. Having mastered the assassination technique, although his strength has not been so exaggerated that it has doubled dozens of times, there is still a significant improvement. At least, he can handle the battle that was difficult at the beginning, and now he can handle it calmly. Take these people and practice your hands. Li Ang looked forward with his eyes and smiled faintly. Immediately after, he used the hiding skills in the top assassination technique, and the whole person disappeared from the sight of everyone. Huh, where's the person? The faces of the 20 killers changed dramatically, and they quickly looked around, seeing the domineering spread, trying to find the trace of Li Ang. But no matter how they searched, they couldn't find any trace of Li Ang. He escaped. A killer asked weakly. Impossible. The others frowned and immediately shook their heads. The situation just now was obviously unfavorable to them. It stands to reason that Li Ang had no need to escape. Puff. Suddenly, the head of a black-clothed killer was cut off, fell to the ground, and rolled several times before stopping. His head and eyes widened, full of shock. He himself did not notice Li Ang's trace, so he was killed so easily. Blood spurted out, and the remaining headless corpses looked extremely terrifying. The smell of blood was more intense, and it lingered on the tip of people's noses. A killer, bizarre death. Even the remaining 19 people didn't feel anyone's existence at all, and their companions were just killed. It is simply, murder is invisible. Everyone felt a sense of familiarity. Isn't that what they do best? Assassination. The art of killing, he performed the art of assassination. He is also a killer, like us, proficient in the art of assassination. A female killer's face changed dramatically and she lost her voice. Chapter 183_play around. What? A black-clothed killer couldn't help but said, in the data, it has never been shown that he is proficient in assassination. The data is wrong, let's go back and get out of here. We're going to die if we can't finish our mission. The rest of the people shook their heads and gritted their teeth. However, the information provided is wrong now, not our problem. Even if the people above are blamed and killed, it is the people who inquired about the news. A female killer thought calmly and said. That's right. Everyone nodded with excitement. Just as they were about to leave. Puff. The head of a female killer fell to the ground and rolled with it. Blood spurted out, staining the entire floor red. The headless corpse of a female killer fell to the ground and gradually became cold. Another person, bizarrely died. 510. Cause of death, was killed. However, they couldn't even see who killed the female killer. This person is proficient in assassination and is even more terrifying than them. If it is said that they are a group of rookies, this person is obviously a top master killer. In addition, even if the other party is not proficient in assassination, they can kill them without the ability to fight back. Now, the other party is also proficient in assassination, which is simply killing them. Fast back. The remaining 18 killers shouted anxiously. I saw that they kicked their feet, desperately trying to run out of the house. The fastest one had already touched the gate. He was going to use a dagger to smash the gate, and then escape the house smoothly. Killers, of course, know the best way to assassinate. In the room, there are so many things to hide and dark corners to hide in. This made them unable to find the trace of Li Ang at all. If you escaped from the room, it would naturally be different. Outside the house, there are very few environments that can be hidden, so Li Ang will naturally be forced to show up and come to a bright confrontation. This is what these killers have in mind. In the technique of assassination, they were so utterly defeated that they could not even find the shadow of Li Ang. The level of killer level between the two is too far apart. However, just as the man was preparing to attack the gate, a cold light flashed away. PFF'd. He covered his neck, his eyes widened, bloodshot filled the air, blood was dripping from the corners of his mouth, and the neck was like a fountain, and the blood was violently thrown on the ground. With a thump, the killer fell to the ground and died. 17 killers left. Quick, run away. Seeing this, the rest of the people were anxious and shouted loudly. They are not afraid of death. As a qualified killer, death is inevitable. But the fear of being completely dominated by the strength of others made them feel terrified. This is absolute suppression. They are completely suppressed by Liang. Not even able to resist. What a terrible thing this is. At this time, Liang held a samurai sword and used a unique method to hide in the corner, and no one could detect his trace. Even if you are arrogant and domineering, you can't do it. The highest way of assassination is not something that can be detected by seeing and domineering. Chapter 183_Play with. The highest way of assassination is not something that can be detected by seeing and domineering. Even if the knowledge and color detect his trace, he can get out of that position in an instant and appear in another area. This can create an effectively chaotic scene. According to the terrifying speed and the ultimate assassination method, he can achieve it, making people feel domineering, and perceive countless traces of he. In this way, it is difficult to find which he is the real him. It's a pity that these killers have been scared out of their minds, and they only care about escaping from the house one by one, instead of using their knowledge and domineering to collide with Liang. Therefore, Liang does not have to create multiple himself to disturb these people's perception of arrogance and domineering. Damn data, give us the wrong data and leave us defenseless. Who would have thought that he was also a killer, and that the method of killing is more clever than us? If we continue to entangle with him, we will be wiped out. Leaving here, even if you leave alone, at least you can tell the people above, it's not that we are useless. It's that this enemy is too strong. Quote. The rest of the killers started talking, looking anxious and talking. They no longer hold the mentality of killing Liang, but hold the sad mentality of surviving as many people as they can. Just because Liang's strength gave them a strong sense of oppression, they had no confidence to compete with Liang at all. Even if there are still 17 killers left, each of whom is strong enough to fight against Liang. Puff! Suddenly, another person's head fell to the ground. Blood spurted out. The killer who was close to this man could not find even the slightest clue, and he noticed that his companion's head had been chopped off, which was terrifying and chilling. Enemy, can't find it, how to fight. They can't even see the shadow of the enemy, even if they want to fight against Liang, they are helpless. As killers, they are now passively killed as prey. This is really a great irony. As killers, they came to assassinate Liang, but in the end, they were indeed assassinated by Liang. However, who would have thought that the target was actually proficient in killing people, which was something they could never have imagined. It's too late to say anything now, they were caught by Liang, and they couldn't escape Liang's palm at all. Puff, puff, puff. The heads of the killers were cut off and rolled to the ground. Anyone who tries to open the door in vain will be killed, which makes the remaining 9 killers no longer act rashly. They stood there, staring at the surroundings, tense and vigilant. There were 22 people when they came, and now, there are only 9 people left. More than half of them died at the hands of Liang. Come out! One of the killers shouted with horror on his face. He can't stand this state of being used as prey anymore. 2.3. Obviously, they are professional killers. However, they were killed as prey. In the surrounding environment, there is always a pair of eyes constantly observing them, so that they dare not relax, and the sense of fear in their hearts is infinitely enlarged. Even though they were trained to be professional killers, they still had a sense of fear in their hearts that they couldn't hide. It's a human being, and it's all scary. Puff! Another head fell to the ground. The rest have been numb to these scenes. The people around them died so strangely that they couldn't find the murderer. The same picture, the same way of dying, kept appearing in their eyes. Liang, who was hidden, seemed to be playing with them, making them fear, but at the same time, he had no choice but to passively die in fear. Chapter 184-Massacre. Tatata. Li Ang walked out of the corner step by step, with a smile on his face, looked at the remaining 8 people, and said lightly, "Your strength is too weak." You. The 8 killers stared at Li Ang, their eyes couldn't hide their horror. Of the 22, 8 remained, and 14 died. This record made them unbelievable when they first came. Although they knew that Li Ang's strength would be very strong, they did not expect that it would be so strong. This incident can be a lesson for them, a lifelong lesson, and there is no second chance. If you have any other abilities, use them. Li Ang's mouth moved slightly and smiled. There are too many things the killer is proficient in. If he can see the opponent display it, the more skills he can get, which is very effective in improving his strength. A variety of abilities may not necessarily be used, but more skills are not overwhelming, and a little more ability is still good. Moreover, there is no need for him to improve the level of these abilities. Under the blessing of a systematic ability, if he obtains any new ability, he can use this ability to perfection. Like those people said, everything is not as good as everything. This kind of situation is impossible for Li Ang. He will only appear in him, all kinds of finesse. The ability given by the system is fully leveled in an instant, he only needs to continuously obtain new abilities, and he does not need to consider the limit of improving a certain ability. When the system originally gave him, it has already raised this ability to the limit. Hidden. The corner of a killer's mouth moved slightly, and his figure gradually disappeared in front of Li Ang. Holding a dagger, he attacked quickly, his figure seemed to have an afterimage, and the speed was extremely fast. Such an assassination technique is too weak in front of me. Li Ang shook his head, holding a samurai sword, armed with a domineering look, and cut him down with one sword. Puff! A head rolls on the ground, and a killer dies. The headless corpse fell to the ground and gradually became icy cold. This is a killer with the lowest level of strength in the Chihuahua. Even if Crocodile is in front of these people, one-on-one, he may not be able to do anything to these people. However, it was this terrifying existence that was slaughtered one after another by Li Ang. In his hands, it is completely impossible to see that these people have the strength level of Chihuahua. But it is also normal, these killers, Li Ang's hands can't even hold 2 moves. No one seems to believe it is Chihuahua. It's not that they are too weak, it can only be said that Li Ang is too strong. Therefore, there is a situation where the strength level of these people cannot be seen. He was already killed before they fought, how can one see the level of strength? At this point, there are 7 killers left. The 7 of them looked at Li Ang nervously, took a deep breath, calmed down their restless mood, and forced themselves to calm down. Come again. Li Ang held a samurai sword, the blade was stained with blood, and fell to the ground along the trajectory. Tick-tock, tick-tock. The blood stained the entire floor red, and the bloody smell merged and became more intense. As Li Ang approached step by step, the 7 killers retreated unconsciously, with expressions of fear that could not be concealed. 4 men and 3 women, 7 professional killers. As a minion trained by the Tianlong people, he has killed countless people for the Tianlong people, and the mission failure rate is 0%, and there has never been a failure. However, today, they are about to face the end of their mission failure. Moreover, 22 killers were dispatched in unison, and all of them failed uniformly. In the end, he couldn't even save his life. The chances of them escaping from Li Ang are only 1 in a million. Puff! Li Ang raised his sword and fell. The samurai sword was full of armed domineering, piercing the heart of a female killer. Ah! Ah! Chapter 184-Massacre. Ah! Ah! The female killer's eyes were full of fear, blood was leaking from the corners of her mouth, and a huge blood hole appeared in her chest. Blood splattered in the sky and spilled onto the ground. With a thump sound, the female killer fell to the ground, completely ushering in the ending of death. She stared at the ceiling with her eyes fixed. Before she died, she didn't realize how Li Ang came to her. 6 killers left. If you don't do it, you will have no chance. Li Ang retracted the samurai's sword, and the smell of blood on the blade reverberated on the tip of his nose. The strong bloody smell was very pungent, but he was used to it. The more people were killed, the more familiar the smell of blood would be. Kill. The killers of the 4 men and 2 women looked at each other, and without turning back, they kicked their feet and launched an attack on their own initiative. As Li Ang said, if they don't attack, they won't have this chance. If you sit still, you are really waiting to die. Thought here. The 6 killers launched the last round of crazy attacks. No matter whether they succeeded or failed, they at least did their best in the end. Seeing the 6 killers approaching gradually, Li Ang's face remained unchanged, and the figure gradually disappeared as he looked at the 6 people in front of him. It was so easy to disappear into the sight of the 6 killers out of thin air. What about people? The pupils of the 6 shrank, and looked around with vigilance on their faces. Li Ang used the assassination technique to hide his traces again. No matter how they looked, they could not find the direction of his existence. The assassination techniques of the 2 sides are not at the same level at all. Li Ang's ultimate assassination technique makes these top professional killers feel a lot of pressure. And this assassination technique is what Li Ang obtained from these people through the system. Furthermore, it is undoubtedly a great irony to use the ability obtained from the opponent to kill the opponent. Puff. A head fell to the ground. There are 5 killers left. The 5 people peeped at each other, their expressions extremely vigilant. 760, 3 men and 2 women, is the last remaining number of killers who are still temporarily alive. Next, they still have to be assassinated by Li Ang, and the chance of surviving is close to 0. Get out of here. A female killer looked firm and shouted. Just finished talking. Puff. Her head just rolled on the ground like this, her pretty face was full of surprise, her eyes still couldn't come back to her senses, and she didn't even know how she died. There are 4 killers left. The death of 1 killer brought the remaining 4 killers to the brink of collapse. Even a person with a strong heart would not be able to bear it if he was assassinated like this by Li Ang. Even though they are professional killers, after encountering a more high-end killer like Li Ang, the fear in their hearts is completely out of control. What to do? The 4 killers stared at each other, unable to do anything. How can I get out of here? Under the assassination of this terrible killer, it seems to be a very difficult problem to escape from this room. Let me come. A middle-aged man killer shouted, kicked his feet, and jumped toward the ceiling. He planned to escape from the ceiling. It's a pity that when he just jumped up, a sharp slash cut through the air and arrived in front of him. Chapter 185-Illusion. Not good. He was shocked, his face changed dramatically, and there was a strong sense of fear in his eyes. PFF'd. This slashing slash hit his waist, severing his entire body, cutting him into 2 halves, and falling to the ground separately, revealing many internal organs and intestines in his body. A mass of pus flowed out, and the scene was so terrifying that the scalp was tingling. The remaining 3 people, 2 men and 1 woman, just stood there, neither moving nor moving. Can't you reveal a little useful ability? Li Ang walked out of the dark corner step by step, and said slightly disappointed. He also wanted to gain some abilities from these people, but at present, these people have been so frightened that they only have one thought in their hearts. That is, get out of here as soon as possible. Apart from fleeing, they didn't have the determination to fight Li Ang to the end. It is no wonder that the strength gap between the 2 sides is too great. Like this level of killer, Li Ang can easily kill 10,000. It is conceivable that these 22 killers are here to kill people or to give away their heads. However, Li Ang was satisfied to be able to get an assassination technique. If that's the case, let's send you all on the road. You guys are no longer worth using. Li Ang held a samurai sword and swung a sharp slash. The bright light swept away. PFF'd. A head rolls on the ground. There was still a man and a woman killer, who were staring at Li Ang in horror, their lips trembling, facing the breath of death, which made the fear in their hearts infinitely magnified. But, despite this, they did not beg for mercy. As a professional killer, begging for mercy is a very ridiculous thing. They naturally knew in their hearts that begging for mercy was of no use. While carrying out their missions and killing others, they encountered hundreds of images of others begging for mercy, but all of them were undoubtedly killed by them. Sympathy. Here, compassion is worthless. Li Ang approached the position of the two killers in front of him step by step. Holding a katana sword, blood permeates the ground on the samurai sword. At this time, crunch. The door to the room opened. Shalulia Palace rubbed her eyes in confusion and asked, "Why are you so noisy?" In an instant, two pairs of eyes were fixed on Zaluria Palace's body. The two killers launched an attack in an instant, holding daggers and rushing towards the location of Zaluria Palace. "Huh, you are." Shalulia Palace's eyes froze, and looked at the two killers who attacked with a look of astonishment. The two killers, one of the women, made her feel a little familiar, as if she had never seen them before. However, the two killers no longer care who Zalulia Palace is, they only know that Zalulia Palace is obviously an existence that can be used as a shield. In this case, if they don't take advantage of this good opportunity, then they don't deserve to be called professional killers. Killers naturally use various situations to achieve their tasks. See. Li Ang's face was calm, and when he lifted his footsteps, the whole person disappeared in place. In terms of speed, he has never been afraid of anyone. "Don't move." The two killers stared at Zaluria Palace, roaring, their eyes reddened. Immediately, Shalulia Palace was frightened, her red lips trembled, and she did not dare to say a word. A figure appeared in front of her. Li Ang's speed is by no means comparable to these two mere killers. Chapter 185-Illusion. Li Ang's speed is by no means comparable to these two mere killers. If it was Kizaru, Li Ang might not be able to catch up at the moment just now. But the target is these two killers, that's another story. Boom. Holding a samurai sword, Li Ang blocked the attack of the two killers, and the corner of his mouth raised an arc, and said, "As killers, you are really a failure. Back." The two retreated violently, and Li Ang did not take the opportunity to attack. He looked at the Zaluria Palace beside him and whispered, "Go back to the room." "Yeah." Shalulia Palace nodded lightly, looked at the corpse on the ground, opened the door, and returned to the house. After returning to the prevention, she found that her legs were a little weak. You know, she killed a lot of people. But seeing the person who was cut in half with one knife, the terrifying picture from the internal organs still impacted her thoughts. It turned out that all along, her so-called cruelty was not even a fart in front of Li Ang. How do the few people just now feel so familiar, like where have they met? Shalulia Palace took a deep breath, thinking in her heart. But in a short time, she still couldn't recall it. Outside the room, Li Ang held a samurai sword, and the two people in front of them moved away with a sharp slash. Puff. The last male killer was killed, and the last female killer. The rest of the killers were wiped out. You are left alone. Li Ang stood in front of the female killer and said with a smile. At this moment, feeling the terrifying pressure, the female killer shivered all over, took a half step back, and supported herself with difficulty, preventing herself from falling to the ground. Fight. The female killer gritted her teeth, her heart was ruthless, her eyes were fixed on Li Ang, and she shouted, 3, 2, 1. After speaking, she snapped her fingers on her right hand. Snapped. For a moment, Li Ang felt that his spirit was impacted, and he quickly shook his head in a trance. A figure flickered in front of him, and the female killer had already arrived in front of him, holding a dagger and slid across Li Ang's neck. At this moment, Li Ang's armed color was domineering and covered his entire body. Boom! The dagger collided with the armed color at the neck, and bursts of fire came out. However, Li Ang was unscathed. He stretched out his right hand and directly grabbed the female killer's neck. He lifted the other party up high and held him tightly. Ah! Nomads! The female killer continued to struggle, her face flushed, and the dagger in her hand fell to the ground, making a crisp and pleasant sound. Almost capsized in the gutter. Li Ang was a little surprised and said with a smile. He touched his neck with his left hand, but fortunately, in the end, the armed color and domineering arrogance were directly used, which blocked the fatal blow of the female killer. Otherwise, he was really hanging just now. However, looking back now, the feeling at that time was a bit strange. The spirit was actually affected. In battle, when the spirit is affected, it is time to die. Fortunately, his mental power is strong enough to quickly offset those negative states. Just now, what kind of ability is it? Li Ang narrowed his eyes slightly, looked at the female killer in front of him, and whispered. This ability to affect the mental power of others, he is very jealous. Chapter 186-Ultimate Illusion. The female killer blushed, couldn't breathe at all, struggled constantly, grabbed Li Ang's arm with both hands, and roared, "Ah, ah! Let me see, what ability is it?" Li Ang's eyes narrowed slightly, and his right hand was slightly loosened. The female killer fell to the ground along the trajectory, coughing violently, gasping for breath, looking particularly embarrassed. After a minute, the female killer finally recovered a little, her eyes looked at Li Ang, full of fear, her hands resting on the floor. She kept retreating, and she opened the distance from Li Ang. Hey, you're a killer. Li Ang's mouth moved slightly, waved his hand, and said helplessly. Is the killer so timid? This is really unexpected. Immediately, Li Ang asked, what is the ability just now? It's a bit similar to hypnosis, isn't it? Hypnotism. My mind was temporarily disturbed. The female killer's mouth moved slightly, but she didn't say a word, her eyes fixed on Li Ang. You can't do it without talking. Li Ang raised his brows and said slowly. It's illusion. The female killer looked terrified and said in a hoarse voice. Illusion. Li Ang's eyes twinkled brightly and a smile appeared. It turned out to be an illusion. This ability is quite new. To deal with those weak people, illusion can completely kill people invisible, and even control a person's every move. 940 If you want to form an army, it will be much more convenient to know illusion. Although they are all manipulated puppets, they can effectively use illusion to drive these people into the enemy's interior, causing internal chaos. It's a really good ability. Li Ang laughed and said slowly, I don't mind, give me your illusion, right? Huh. The female killer was stunned, not knowing why. Has she never heard that someone can borrow illusion? At the same time, the sound of the system appeared in Li Ang's head as expected. Congratulations to the host, open the modifier, illusion plus 999,999. Open black lens bracket comprehend dreamland close black lens bracket. Open black lens bracket breakthrough novice close black lens bracket. Open black lens bracket breakthrough entry close black lens bracket. Open black lens bracket breakthrough proficiency close black lens bracket. Open black lens bracket breakthrough master close black lens bracket. Open black lens bracket breakthrough master close black lens bracket. Sure enough. A deep smile appeared on Li Ang's face, which was revealed unabashedly on his face. The female killer who was slumped on the ground was even more surprised, looking at Li Ang's expression constantly changing. Even she was a little suspicious. Could it be that the person in front of her is a schizophrenic person? Let me try it, the ultimate illusion. What kind of effect can be achieved? Li Ang fixed the line of sight BHDJ on the female killer and asked with a smile, what's your name? I don't have a name, only a number. The female killer shook her head, her voice was very hoarse, and she looked at Li Ang with a very heavy expression. What's the number? Li Ang spoke again and asked. Number 7. The female killer's expression remained unchanged, and she whispered. Her eyes flickered and she was thinking about how to escape in order to get out of here effectively. If I asked you to betray your original master, would you do so? Li Ang asked with a hint of interest. Chapter 186-Ultimate Illusion. Li Ang asked with a hint of interest. The female killer was silent and did not speak. Such an attitude also allowed Li Ang to give up directly. It is an absolute fact that a well-trained killer cannot betray the original owner. However, Li Ang, who has illusion, can do one thing: let this female killer kill the original owner, which is a very terrifying thing. I know your attitude. Since that's the case, then I'll let you feel the thrill of killing your master. This kind of pleasure is indescribable. Li Ang squatted down, looked at the female killer, and said with a smile. His eyes, like the dazzling starry sky, can absorb people's sight. The female killer was instantly fascinated, her face was blank, and her eyes met Li Ang. 3, 2, 1. Li Ang snapped his fingers, the corners of his mouth curled slightly, and said, "From now on, you and your master are enemies who killed your father. You took advantage of your undercover status and finally succeeded in winning his trust. Now, it's you who will take revenge. It's time." I understand. The female killer's eyes were scattered, like a puppet, and she whispered. See. Li Ang's expression became even more exciting. It turned out that this is the demeanor of the person controlled by the illusion. Although there is a little less vigor, if you do not observe carefully, you will definitely not be able to detect these changes. Li Ang forcibly used illusion to reverse the female killer's attitude towards the master. Apart from this, she has the same attitude towards other things. The memory has not disappeared, the only thing that has changed is that in her heart now, she wants to kill her master of the Dragon Day fiercely at all times. Go, I think, you should know who your enemy is. Li Ang stroked the female killer's hair and smiled lightly. I see. The female killer nodded, her eyes filled with hatred. After seeing the female killer's demeanor and inner words, Li Ang had a deeper understanding of his illusion. The ultimate illusion given by the system is really terrifying to the extreme. Even a person's thoughts and concepts are forcibly distorted. This is the horror of illusion. Even Li Ang himself has not been able to discover that illusion is so terrifying. Of course. The effect of illusion also depends on the strength level of the enemy. It is obviously impossible for a powerhouse at the level of the four emperors to use illusion to change the opponent's will. But it's more than enough to deal with people of the current level of female killers. The most terrifying point is that the things changed by illusion will affect this person for life. That is to say, unless the female killer is killed, the fact that her original master is her lifelong enemy will not change over time. Okay, it's time for you to go. With a smile, Li Ang patted the other party's shoulder and said. Yeah. The female killer stood up from the ground and stared blankly at the surrounding killer corpses without any emotional fluctuations. Then, holding the dagger, she left here step by step in Li Ang's sight. Looking at the back of the female killer, Li Ang narrowed his eyes slightly, his expression a little expectant. I'm afraid, this time, the Tianlong people are really going to die. And this female killer is just a chess piece. As long as she kills the Tianlong people, she is equivalent to having no desire to survive and will commit suicide by herself. At that time, everything has nothing to do with Li Ang. I am really looking forward to it. What will the faces of those Tianlong people look like? It will be interesting to be counter-killed by the killers trained by them. The corners of Li Ang's mouth twitched, and he smiled faintly. After his ultimate illusion blessing, the female killer has enough anger to vent on her own master. Forcibly distorting a person's concept of a person is definitely a very scary thing. Even Li Ang felt a burst of surprise. The ultimate illusion, if used properly, he can create an absolute rule of the empire. Chapter 187 I'll take your dog's life, please customize it. In the blink of an eye, Li Ang looked at the corpse on the ground and waved his hand helplessly. The house that had been clean and tidy now collapsed. 21 people were killed, and all fell to the ground. The blood penetrated into the floor, and there was a bloody smell. There are also some people who were directly cut in half, and even their internal organs were exposed. Immediately, Li Ang took out the phone bug. Boo boo. After the phone worm dialed, there was the sound of Disco. Hello, who is that? It's me. Li Ang's face was calm, and he said lightly, send a few people here to carry my corpse away. There are a few who don't have long eyes who came to assassinate me, and they were all solved for me. Lord Li Ang. Disco's voice became visibly sharper, full of respect. Don't worry, my lord, I'll take someone over here myself to help you clean up the house. Besides, these people are too bold to do anything to you. Don't worry, I'll find out their identities. No need, just send someone to clean up the corpse. I have already made arrangements for other things, so I won't bother you. Li Ang shook his head and said bluntly. Yes, my lord. After hanging up the phone bug, Li Ang looked at the corpses everywhere, walked to the door, and opened the door. Sir. Shalulia Palace's beautiful eyes looked at Li Ang, still a little panicked. In addition to panic, her expression had some other mysterious air. Immediately, Li Ang saw the domineering spread, and took everything in Shalulia Palace's heart into his heart. His eyes twinkled and he asked, You recognize them? They are the subordinates of an uncle I knew in Marijoa. Moreover, they are also very powerful killers. Shalulia Palace's red lips parted slightly, with a strong shock, said. You really recognized it. A smile appeared on Li Ang's face and said. Soon. Disco personally led the staff to the front of the house. Under Li Ang's order, Disco led the staff to clean up the corpses in the room. Seeing the hideous and terrifying appearance of the corpse, even some veterans couldn't help but vomit, and their throats were sore with nausea. This is hell on earth. A middle-aged strong man took a deep breath and said in a low voice. His face gradually turned pale, especially when he saw the internal organs and intestines of a corpse. It should not be too scary. Don't waste time, get things done as soon as possible. Disco frowned and quickly reprimanded. Under his leadership, everyone works very efficiently. It took about half an hour. The corpse has been processed, and there are still bloodstains in the room. The blood was washed away. Disco instructed the staff to clean the blood on the walls and floors. Another hour or so passed. The room has a new look, and their cleaning ability is still very impressive. Sir, we've got it done. Disco looked at Li Ang and said flatteringly. This move made the surrounding subordinates a little surprised. They haven't seen Li Ang yet, so naturally they don't know. Li Ang is the real boss of the auction house. And Disco is just a part-time job under Li Ang. Yes, you can go now. Li Ang patted Disco on the shoulder and smiled in appreciation. The smell of blood in the room has been swept away, the ability is visible, and he will naturally not be stingy to praise the other party. Sir, don't be polite. If there are other things, please do not hesitate to tell me. I will definitely go up to the mountain and go down to the sea of fire. I will do it properly for you. Chapter 187 _ I'll take your dog's life, please customize it. Sir, don't be polite. If there are other things, please do not hesitate to tell me. I will definitely go up to the mountain and go down to the sea of fire. I will do it properly for you. Disco was excited for a while, bowed his head, and said respectfully. If he can hold Li Ang's thigh, his future will be limitless. This is a terrifying figure that even Tianlong people dare to fight. Even, the Navy headquarters did not dare to take action against Li Ang easily, and to have a good relationship with Li Ang, even as a little brother, Disco was very excited. Immediately, Disco led a group of younger brothers and gradually left the house. Seeing the departure of Disco and others, Li Ang walked into the room again, and saw that the pretty face of Shalulia Palace was in a daze, the corners of his mouth twitched, and he swooped. Suddenly, an intriguing sound came from the room again. The other side. After Disco led the staff out of the house, a group of younger brothers hurriedly asked, "Master Disco, who is that master?" "That lord, his name, you must be thunderous." Disco's eyes twinkled with admiration, and said, "He is the one in the rumors, Lord Liang." "What?" The crowd was shocked and horrified. It turned out that behind Mr. Disco, Mr. Liang was standing. This backer was too terrifying. Thinking of this, many younger brothers secretly made up their minds that they must perform better in the eyes of Master Disco. In this way, there may be a chance to win the eyes of Master Liang. "Let's go, today's affairs are all rotten in your stomach, do you know?" Disco looked at the crowd and said. "Don't worry, Disco, we know what to say and what not to say." The crowd nodded. 3 days later. Holy Land Mary Joa. At the position of the port coast, a warship was gradually approaching. The female killer named Number 7 stood on the board and gradually logged in. "Sir." Everywhere she went, there would be people bowing their heads respectfully. As a professional killer under the Tianlong people, her status is self-evident. Although in the eyes of Tianlong people, she is also a pariah. But compared to the ordinary pariah, the status is also much higher. Unhindered all the way, her movements in Marijoy are unrestricted. Except for some extremely personal and very secret places, most of the areas she can go to are still unstoppable. This shows how much the Tianlong people trust her. Dong dong dong. Number 7 walked to the door of a luxurious palace and knocked on the door. A housekeeper opened the door, saw Number 7, and said respectfully, "Sir Number 7, Li Hao. Take me to the master." Number 7 was expressionless and said lightly, "Yes, sir, please come with me." The butler nodded and led Number 7 down the path of the palace. Soon. Arrive at the destination. The butler pointed to a door ahead and whispered, "The master is inside." "I see." 7 nodded, opened the door, and entered. As soon as she walked in the door, she saw a middle-aged man with a pot belly, who was lying on a chair to eat. On the surrounding ground, beautiful women were chained and crawled on the ground like dogs. "Seventh, are you back? Is the mission completed?" The middleman looked at Number 7, his expression full of majesty, and asked. "In law, of Saint Roswald, Saint Daegu." Hearing this, the corners of Number 7's mouth moved slightly, without any emotion. His eyes were fixed on Degusheng's body, and he said coldly, "I'm here to take your dog's life." Chapter 188-Tianlong people kneel down. In an empty room. The atmosphere fell into silence and depression. Degusheng's eyes were gloomy and his brows were furrowed. He stared at Number 7 and asked, "What did you just say?" "The revenge of killing my father is unbearable." Number 7 shouted loudly with a face full of anger. In the room, only she and Degusheng were left. It is conceivable that Number 7 is also trusted in the eyes of Degusheng. But after being forcibly distorted her ideas, she was full of hatred for Degusheng. At this moment, Degusheng fell into a deep doubt in his heart, and his face was puzzled. Number 7 is deeply trusted in his heart, even though he does not regard Number 7 as a human being, but as a killing machine. However, he was 100% confident that he would never betray him. But what he saw now made him unable to believe it. "Number 7, do you know what you're talking about? What is your father's revenge? Who are you bewitched by?" Degusheng took a deep breath and shouted in a deep voice. "Come on." Number 7 ignored the old sage, took out his dagger, kicked his feet, and used the technique of assassination to instantly disappear into the dark environment. "Stop." 000 Degusheng's pupils shrank and shouted quickly. He didn't care about what was going on at the moment, and immediately got up from his chair. "You know, he doesn't have much defense here. Number 7 is a killing machine that he trusts very much. From the beginning to the end, he never expected that Number 7 would suddenly kill him. And his own strength is only an ordinary person who is slightly stronger than ordinary people. Apart from the identity, nothing else stands out. Therefore, when number 7 shot, Dagusheng expected that things were not going well. Die. The figure of number 7 appeared beside Dagusheng, and the corner of his mouth twitched, sneering. No, stop, I have raised you for 20 years, is that what you do to me? You are bewitched, I have never killed your father. Immediately, stop me. Dagust shouted with horror on his face. His eyes twinkled brightly, and he planned to stabilize number 7's emotions before waiting for the support of others. In a one-on-one situation, he is no match for number 7 at all. Only by delaying time can he have a chance. Not to mention, number 7 stopped the movement of his hand, and the dagger reached the neck of the ancient sage, and it was almost enough to take the life of the ancient sage of Germany BHFC. Number 7 stared at Dagusheng, his eyes filled with monstrous resentment. Falling into illusion, she has changed one thing for the rest of her life. Is it too cheap to kill you like this? Number 7 narrowed his eyes slightly and said coldly, kneel down on the ground for me, what about the Tianlong people? If I can make the Tianlong people kneel, I can be considered number 1. Quote. You. Dagusheng's face changed and he lost his voice. Want him to kneel? He is a dragon man. In this world, no one can make him kneel, except for the adult in the deepest part of Mary Joa, not even the 5 old stars can make him kneel. You make me kneel. Dagusheng's face was extremely gloomy, looking at number 7, his voice was hoarse. Kneel, or not kneel? Number 7 was holding a dagger, expressionless, and said coldly. The slightest inch of her dagger, Daguist would fall to the ground. I'm a dragon man. Dagusheng raised his head and shouted proudly, you are just a pariah, or my dog slave. I raised you. Now, you want me to kneel down for you. I repeat, do you kneel or not? Number 7 was expressionless, holding the dagger in his right hand, ready to start. Chapter 188-Tianlong people kneel down. Number 7 was expressionless, holding the dagger in his right hand, ready to start. Impossible. Dagusheng has no hesitation and is firm. If that's the case, then go die. Number 7 sneered, holding a dagger and swiping past. The dagger pierced through the air, about to pierce Daguest's neck. At this time, Dagust shouted, wait a minute. The dagger stopped, and number 7's movements stopped, looking at Dagusheng without any emotion, and said, kneel down. Good. Dagusheng gritted his teeth, his face full of suffocation and anger, but due to the status quo, he had to choose to succumb to the power of number 7. If he doesn't kneel, now, he will be killed. There is no one here. As long as she is killed, no one will know about my kneeling. Dagusheng thought so in his heart and breathed a sigh of relief. However, to make him kneel, the mood is still extremely depressed and heavy. In order to survive, even Tianlong people have to put down their noble knees and kneel on the ground. If you delay any longer, the dagger in my hand won't have eyes. Number 7 glanced at Dagusheng lightly and said bluntly. Okay, I'll kneel. Being seen through the thoughts in his heart, Dagusheng became angry, but he did not dare to attack on the spot. In the house, he and number 7 were the only 2 people who could not hold back the chicken, and number 7 was a terrifying killer comparable to Chihuahua. Under such circumstances, if he chooses to resist, the result will be self-evident. He would die horribly and be killed in an instant. However, it is quite difficult to kneel down. Dagusheng's face was gloomy and uncertain, and he couldn't kneel for a long time. Even though he made up his mind, the arrogance that belonged to the Tianlong people made him unable to kneel at all. Since you don't kneel, I'll help you. Number 7's eyes twinkled brightly, revealing a cold smile. Seeing this smile, Dagusheng's expression became unnatural, and he lost his voice. What do you want to do? I want to help you. 7 grinned, a meaningful expression on his face. I see. She dodged and appeared behind Dagusheng, holding a dagger and swiping past. Stop. Dagusheng seemed to be aware of it and cried out. The sound isolation measures in the room were so good that his voice could not reach the outside at all. At this time, he had to resent the person who built the palace at that time. Why, to make the sound insulation of the room so perfect? This is killing him. Puff. Blood splattered. The dagger slid over the back of Daguest's knee, the nerves were severed, and blood spurted out, staining the ground red. Ah! A deep sense of pain enveloped him, causing him to cry out unbearably, his expression grim, his eyes bloodshot. In an instant, he lost the ability to control his legs, his nerves were cut off, and naturally, he had become a completely disabled person. With a thump, Dagusheng knelt on the ground, his hands on the floor, his face full of fear and anger. Feeling that his legs were unconscious, he already knew that these two legs were completely scrapped. You. Dagusheng stared at number 7 with anger. Isn't it okay to just kneel down by yourself? It's really annoying to have to ask someone to help you. Number 7 gradually walked in front of Dagusheng, looked down from a condescending height, and smiled faintly, the so-called Tianlong people, but this is not the case, it is not for me, the untouchables in your mouth are kneeling. Chapter 189 _ The Death of Tianlong People. You. Dagusheng's heart was filled with anger, and a mouthful of blood spurted out. He was vomiting blood. An absolutely die-hard killer that he personally cultivated, actually, not only betrayed himself, but also tortured himself so much, which he couldn't believe. Could it be that after more than 20 years of training, can't a person's loyalty be worth 100%? He didn't know that, in fact, if it weren't for the reason of illusion, number 7 would be 100% loyal to Dagusheng. But after something like illusion has forcibly changed a person's consciousness, the person and the original person have already had a huge change. A person who was originally righteous, after being hit by illusion, can make a righteous person evil at any time if the illusionist wants, or the kind that does all evil. It is quite scary to change the thinking and recognition in a person's head. Now, give me repentance. Number 7 looked down at Dagusheng and smiled faintly. The dagger in her hand was still dripping blood, staining the ground red. The smell of blood gradually filled the air. The sound insulation in the room is perfect, so even if Daguest screams in pain until his throat is broken, it is impossible for anyone outside to hear it. This is also considered, he is self-inflicted. Call me a doctor. Daguest was terrified, his whole body trembling. Feeling the loss of blood, he seemed to smell the breath of death. He is also afraid of death. People with high powers are most afraid of death. Doctor, you think beautifully. Number 7 sneered again and again, holding a dagger and swinging it in his hand. You want to kill me? Dagusheng's face changed, and he understood what number 7 was thinking. Feelings, the other party never planned to let him go from the very beginning. He still held a trace of luck in his heart, and now the luck was lost in an instant. No one could help him. In this room, he and number 7 were the only ones, and now that he had his legs cut off, his only hope of escaping was wiped out. Did you ever think about this day when you killed my father? Number 7 held the dagger in his hand and slid across Dagusheng's cheek, calmly speaking. I didn't kill your father, I just bought you from someone else. I don't know anything about other things, I didn't do it. Dagusheng felt aggrieved in his heart and couldn't help shouting quickly. He didn't kill number 7's father at all. He doesn't even know who number 7's father is. Why was he suddenly put on such a hat? He couldn't tell how hard he was. Death is imminent, and I still want to quibble, but I don't know whether to live or die. Number 7's face became icy cold, and holding a dagger, slid through Dagusheng's arm. Puff. Dagusheng's arm was slashed with a bright red slit, blood was exposed, and it was terrifying. Feeling the blood leaking, Dagusheng became even more frightened and begged, Don't kill me, if you kill me, you will not survive. I was wrong, I killed your father, please forgive me. It's really you. Number 7's eyes were red, and he shouted angrily. Puff! Dagusheng vomited blood and nearly died. He wanted to say, Madam, what do you want from me? I deny you are not happy, I admit it, you still want to kill me. Okay, alright, the people of Tianlong also have such a lowly bonehead as you. Today, everyone will die together, and there will be a companion on Wangquan Road. If I encounter you on Wangquan Road, I will kill you. Number 7 raised his head and laughed frantically, his spirit approaching the brink of collapse. The hatred in her head is infinitely magnified, and it has almost become the only purpose of her life. You are crazy. Chapter 189 _ The Death of Tianlong People. You are crazy. Dagusheng's pupils shrank and he lost his voice. I'm crazy, how can I keep a calm mind when I see the enemy who killed my father? Number 7 laughed loudly, holding a dagger and swiping from Dagusheng's arm. A piece of meat fell to the ground. Ah! Dagusheng's eyes were enlarged, bloodshot filled, and the pain was unbearable and rolled on the ground, struggling. This is unbearable, but this is just the beginning. Number 7 narrowed his eyes slightly and said with a smile. Her smile, in Dagusheng's eyes, is the smile of the devil. Come on, help. You bastards, come and save me, I'm going to be killed by the goddamn traitor number 7. Immediately, come in for me. No, no, don't come here. Quote. Dagusheng was lying on the ground, his hands on the floor with difficulty, and he kept moving. With his legs cut off, he could no longer walk on the floor. Blood was constantly spilling from his body, like a bloody man, and his blood was all over the floor, billowing. Number 7 was soft-handed, with a cold smile, knife after knife, constantly torturing the old sage, making him unbearable and wailing in pain. The sound insulation effect is so good that people outside still can't find it. This made Dagusheng despair. He looked at number 7 who was approaching step by step, and said in a lost voice, Stop torturing me, I can't take it anymore. Please, don't kill me, spare me. Forgive you. Since the moment you killed my father, today's end is doomed. Number 7 sneered, holding a dagger, and pierced Dagusheng's thigh again. Dagusheng wailed and screamed, feeling aggrieved in his heart, but there was nothing he could do. He wanted to say that he didn't know any father at all. All this was wronged by others. But he had already forgotten who could force a murderous killer to add a non-existent thing. Moreover, it also made this person 100% absolute trust. 0. After half an hour. Dagusheng is not dead, but he is dying, and there is only a pile of skeletons left on his body, blood flowing on the ground, rolling around. Pieces of bright red meat were scattered all over the floor, and the whole room was filled with a strong smell of blood. Dagusheng wanted to speak, but he was unable to speak. He opened his mouth with difficulty, unable to speak. Send you on your way. Holding a dagger, number 7 looked at Daguist, without any emotional fluctuations, and slid down. Puff! Dagusheng's head fell to the ground and rolled several times before it stopped. His eyes widened, but he still couldn't close them, he couldn't rest his eyes. A high-ranking Tianlong person died. Moreover, the identity of Dagusheng is still relatively influential among the Tianlong people. Compared with Saint Roswald, Daguest's influence is a little higher. However, even the old sage himself could not have imagined that in the end, he actually died at the hands of the killer he had personally cultivated for 20 years. It was even killed because of a non-existent matter. Tianlong people, when faced with this kind of predicament, also appeared cowardly, and could only passively bear the murderous intent from number 7 and could not resist. I finally got my revenge. Father, you are in the spirit of heaven, you can rest in peace. Number 7 threw away the dagger, with tears in his eyes, he roared. She didn't know that, in fact, she was just a puppet. In her opinion, the things that changed after being subjected to illusions were facts. Chapter 190 _ Big Event. Dong dong dong. The door was knocked. Number 7's pupils shrank. His face changed. He looked at the corpse of the ancient saint on the ground, holding a dagger. His expression became very unnatural. His eyes rolled, thinking about the next plan. After killing De Gusheng, it is still very difficult for her to escape from here. The smell of blood cannot be concealed. Once the gates are opened, the news of her killing De Gust will spread. She doesn't think that her strength can escape from Mary Joa. Immediately after, Number 7 made a move, ready to clean up the room. However, at this moment, crunch! The door was opened. Several men in black clothes walked in with their heads lowered and said in a low voice, "Sir, I'm disturbing your time, but Lord St. Roswald is calling you outside." Silence. Number 7's movements stopped abruptly. 660 inches, his hands were holding the headless corpse of De Gusheng, and he looked at the few men in black in front of him, motionless. Ah! Several men in black were stunned, staring blankly at the corpse on the ground. In the air, the smell of blood filled the air and was very pungent. "Master De Gusheng." The man in black's lips trembled, his face full of horror, and he trembled. Their eyes widened. The corpse on the ground, the rolling head, appeared in their eyes, making them unable to believe what was happening in front of them. De Gusheng, actually dead. "This is Tianlong, Lord De Gusheng. Just killed. Your Excellency was killed, someone. A man in black shouted loudly, his expression full of anxiety. They glared at 7, made a bad application, and prepared to pull out their pistols. But Number 7 was faster, holding a dagger, and instantly arrived in front of the 3 of them, raising the knife in his hand. Puff, puff, puff. Several men in black covered their necks with their hands, and blood spurted out from their necks and spilled onto the ground. With a thump, they all fell to the ground and died on the spot. Not good. Number 7's face changed greatly, and he heard the sound of footsteps in the corridor outside. Finally made sense. If these men in black had just come in, she would have taken the shot immediately, and she would not have given them a chance to speak. But now, these people have shouted, causing all the guards in the entire palace to notice. There is a large group of guards, constantly approaching. No matter how strong she is, she still looks pale and powerless at this moment. Unless she can fight against all the tyrannical guards in the palace by herself. She is just a trusted killer. The real tyrannical ones are the powerful, terrifying guards hidden in the palace. These people are vaguely capable of competing with the generals. Still can't escape. There was a hint of bitterness at the corner of Number 7's mouth, and he shook his head and sighed. The sound of footsteps in my ear became louder and louder. By herself, she is basically hopeless. Immediately, she looked back at the corpse of the ancient saint on the ground, and there was a bit of a crazy smile on her face. However, after revenge, I have no meaning to live. Finished talking. Holding a dagger, she looked at the surrounding scene with a little nostalgia, and touched her neck. Puff. Blood flows. Her eyes were scattered, and she gradually fell to the ground, twitching, and her life breath was rapidly dissipating. Before she died, she saw a large group of people in black appeared in the room. They were anxious and rushed to the position of De Gusheng's corpse, shouting and roaring constantly. Chapter 190-Big Event. Before she died, she saw a large group of people in black appeared in the room. They were anxious and rushed to the position of De Gusheng's corpse, shouting and roaring constantly. Seeing this picture, she became more and more excited, but in the end, she couldn't keep the loss of her life. Her eyes gradually closed, and she died. Lord Daegu, Lord Daegu. My God, my lord, was actually killed. Is it Number 7? She actually betrayed the Lord, and instead tortured the Lord to the point of death. This damn pariah, how dare she do such a treacherous thing? Quote. A group of men in black roared, looking at the dead body of Number 7 on the ground, cursing for a while. But now, even if they scold the dead 7 again, it's of no use. De Gust is dead, and no matter how angry they are, they have to accept this fact. Quick, go and inform Lord Roswald. A man in black shouted loudly. Suddenly, several men in black quickly walked out of the room. Saint Roswald, who was approaching, was looking at the man in black with a smile, and said lightly, "Let's lead the way." "Sir, no." The man in black sweated profusely, lowered his head, and said quickly, "Lord Roswald, Lord Daegu, he was killed." "What?" Saint Roswald's pupils shrank, and he lost his voice. "Lead the way." "Yes, my lord." Under the leadership of the man in black, Saint Roswalder arrived in the room smoothly, and saw the tragic deceased, who was obviously tortured before his death. Disgust. Saint Roswald's eyes widened, and his face was full of horror. He quickly walked forward, looking at a headless corpse and the head separated from the body. The whole person trembled and his throat was dry. "What's happening here? Daegu was actually killed. It's unbelievable. Who can kill the Draco in Marijoa? There is no such thing in this world. Who is it?" Saint Roswald grabbed the collar of a man in black and asked. "She is already dead." The man in black was frightened, pointed to the number 7 who had already died on the ground, and said truthfully. "She is Daegu-san's killer, I remember her." Betrayal. Saint Roswald took a deep breath and said solemnly. For this killer, he is still very impressed. When meeting with Daegu, he always saw the killer's shadow beside Daegu. This also means that Daegu trusts this killer quite a bit. But why is this happening now? Explain to me the situation at the time. Saint Roswald calmed down and asked calmly. At that time, after number 7 came back from the outside world, she immediately looked for Lord Daegu. I thought that she had completed the task and wanted to report to the Lord. But 2.6 did not expect that such a thing would happen. The housekeeper stood up, wiped his tears, and said, "Outside missions." Saint Roswald's face changed slightly. The first thing he thought of was the mission about Liang. This mission was initiated by him, and Daegu was just a member of the mission. The killer dispatched was also aimed at Liang. This is very clear in his heart. Is it related to this matter? Saint Roswald frowned, but he still couldn't think of why number 7 betrayed. Who can make a loyal killer who has been trained for more than 20 years betray? Or, this killer has been hiding for more than 20 years and has been looking for opportunities to kill Daegu. He couldn't come up with an answer, but he knew in his heart that today, a big event really happened in Marijoa, an unprecedented big event. Chapter 191 The Turmoil of Marijoa. Liang. Saint Roswald's eyes narrowed, his teeth gritted, and his resentment against Liang reached the extreme. Although he couldn't be sure whether this matter was related to Liang, he naturally blamed everything on Liang for the changes that occurred at this time. On the ground, Daegu body was already cold. If left unchecked, it will quickly corrode. Look here. Saint Roswald issued an order to the man in black beside him. Yes, my lord. The man in black nodded, and everyone was guarding here, not moving an inch. Immediately, Saint Roswald moved his footsteps, glanced at Daguest's body for the last time, and left the palace without hesitation. The matter here is too big, and he has to report to many Tianlong people. I believe that soon this incident will sweep through the entire Marijoa. Inside a splendid palace hall. The huge long table was surrounded by a group of gorgeously dressed people. The atmosphere was very depressing. Headed by the 5 old stars and other 5 people. Daegu is dead. Saint Roswald sat in the corner with a bit of anger on his face, and said solemnly. What? The crowd was instantly shocked. 17. Everyone looked at each other and couldn't believe the words of Saint Roswald. In Marijoa, who can kill the Draco? Daegu died, will they suffer next? When they heard the news of Daegu death, the people here first thought of whether there would be a crisis with their own lives. Tianlong people are all selfish. Why? Among the 5 old stars, the knife-wielding man in a kimono raised his brows and asked. It was killed by the loyal killer he had cultivated for 20 years. Of course, no one could see the picture at that time. Saint Roswald continued, a loyal killer for 20 years, who was also cultivated by Dagusheng. The reason why she wants to kill Dagusheng is intriguing. Hearing this, everyone fell into silence. Really? Will a loyal killer for 20 years betray his master? If you really want to betray, why do you choose to do it at this time? There was really no chance in the past, so I had to wait 20 years. This reason makes no sense at all. But what was it that made her change her mind and act on Dagusheng? Even Wu Laoxing and other 5 people pondered for a while, but couldn't think of the answer. Did you hide from us? What did you do? The 5 old stars looked at Saint Roswald, frowned and asked. Saint Roswald said bluntly, we organized a group of killers, with a total of 22 people, to assassinate Liang. In the end, it was nothing. And the killer of Dagust came back from the Chambord Islands. Well. Wu Laoxing looked bad and asked, didn't I tell you not to do anything to him at the beginning? Do you know how much trouble we will cause if we provoke him now? Isn't it your duty to protect our Tianlong people? A pariah makes you so afraid. What about the courage of your 5 elders? Was it eaten by a dog? Roswald's face did not change, and he shouted loudly. Along with his words, many Tianlong people present also made a noise. I'm a Tianlong person, and I can't even provoke a pariah. What is he? That's right, you 5 old stars are too incompetent. Chapter 191 _ The Turmoil of Mary Joa. Please customize it. That's right, you 5 old stars are too incompetent. Whoever we want to kill, no one in this world can stop us. Likewise, there is no one we Tianlong people can't afford to provoke. Quote. Fool. Wu Laoxing thought to himself, angry, and did not say anything. Seeing the chaotic atmosphere at the scene, they had to speak to contain it. Let's go back to the present thing first. There are many strange things about the killing of Dagusheng. I suspect it has something to do with Liang. Saint Roswald's voice was cold and said directly. Evidence? Wu Laoxing asked. No. Saint Roswald shook his head and denied it. If there is evidence, there is no need for him to speculate here. You are trying to provoke a terrifying powerhouse without evidence. Yes, he did beat your son, but he didn't kill the Tianlong people, which is already within our tolerance. Now, you must know how many of the 22 killers you sent back in the end. Of the 22, there is still one left or come back. This person is also likely to be the one who is in charge of the wind. Therefore, he was ignored before he could flee back to Mary Joa in embarrassment. Quote. Wu Laoxing's face was angry, and he reprimanded loudly. To provoke Liang. It's not that they didn't expect to kill Liang, but roughly estimated the price made them feel heavy. I would rather fight against the 2 emperors at the same time than break out with Liang. The destructive power of Liang alone is too terrifying. How will you deal with the matter of Dagusheng? Saint Roswald looked at the 5 old stars and asked. Send people to look for clues, but since the murderer is dead, we can't find other factors no matter how we look for it. There is no other way for this matter. The 5 old stars responded uniformly. The people who killed the Tianlong people were naturally angry in their hearts, and they wanted to smash the other side to ashes. However, the murderers are already dead. What can they do? Let the murderer be resurrected and kill again to show the authority of the Tianlong people. Here, Wu Laoxing and others are also very helpless, and the most fearful thing is to encounter such a situation. When encountering those who are not afraid of death, kill the Tianlong people, and then commit suicide, even if they have great authority, it will not help. Everyone is dead, what else can they do? Then the death of our Tianlong people, isn't there any movement? Saint Roswald's face was not good, said. The murderer is dead, and we have no way to deal with it any longer. 5 old stars answered again. But this answer obviously did not satisfy the Tianlong people. Each of them is afraid of death. What should I do if this happens to me too? After the murderer finished killing, he immediately committed suicide. This almost cult method made them feel panic in their hearts. In exchange for life, in the end, it is they who suffer the most. They consider themselves noble. How can they be allowed to exchange their lives with these pariahs? Here, I hope you all do your best. Send as many people as possible to protect yourself, and, look at people, be more careful. The untouchables in your eyes may kill you. A fat man among the 5 old stars took a deep breath and reminded. After all, they consider themselves lofty and do not take the world in their eyes. But for many things, they also need these so-called untouchables to execute. Therefore, it also gave those untouchables a chance to kill them. The meeting soon disbanded. However, this news swept the entire Marijoa, making all Tianlong people tremble, and quickly dispatched additional personnel to protect their own lives. In case, like De Gusheng, he was betrayed by his subordinates, what should we do? Chapter 192 CP0 dispatched. Please customize. In an empty room. The 5 old stars gathered together and were thinking about countermeasures. Are you going to inform that lord? The man in the kimono with the knife thought for a while and asked. No need, a celestial dragon died, it just died in Marijoa. The news won't spread out, and it won't have much impact on the world. It's not as serious as the kidnapping of celestial dragons. You don't need to alarm the lord about this matter. The fat man in the 5 old stars said so. Indeed, that lord doesn't care about the news. The rest of the people nodded. As for who is the adult in their mouth? Except for I am, Lord of the Void, no one can be the lord they say. This is the king of the dragon people. Li Ang is suspicious, what do you think? One person frowned and whispered. Man in the kimono with the knife nodded and said slowly, there is a suspicion, but it is still uncertain whether it is him. I am afraid that it will be counterproductive. Well, send CP0 to Chambord Archipelago to investigate, what do you think? I agree. I agree. Okay, then dispatch, Raw Blue Cheese Pair. The rest have other tasks, and the investigation of this incident will be handed over to him and his men. The 5 old stars made a plan on the spot, called the phone bug, and gave orders to Rob Lukey and others in person. Has become CP0, is the most suitable person to investigate. Moreover, apart from him, the original group of sinful people from CP9 also had to carry out this order. Of course. The 5 old stars don't think that these people can find any useful clues, but at least, it is better than sitting still, there is a slight chance, that's it. CP9 mission at the beginning made the 5 old stars stripped of the identities of these people, but in the end, they were released and continued to perform the mission. It takes a lot of effort to cultivate these agents. It is better to use the waste and let these people continue to work for the world government. Chambord Islands. In the past few days, the pirates formed an alliance and launched an attack on the navy, causing heavy casualties on both sides. And Kazaru was also sent back to the navy headquarters, and the remaining navy was simply not able to deal with the pirates who joined forces, so the death situation was far more than the death situation of the pirates. Therefore, in the next time, the navy also evacuated the Chambord Islands one after another. The missing Tianlong people could not be found here, not even the shadow of the murderer. With the passage of time, the naval headquarters could not bear such a consumption of manpower and material resources, and could only dispatch most of the navy back to the naval headquarters. The number of navies left here is not much, and it has almost returned to the state of the former Chambord Islands. Pirates should come, and they will still come here. The navy is still turning a blind eye. It is impossible that every time a pirate is discovered, a battle will break out to catch the pirate. In this case, a large number of soldiers and horses will die in the navy every day. Even the headquarters of the navy does not want to see such a situation. At this time, Shachi ripped off. Inside the pub, the flow of people has gradually increased. Many pirates poured into the tavern, drinking and eating meat, making a lot of noise. The guys in the Navy haven't left yet. Do you think we pirates are easy to mess with? If we stop us from entering the New World, we will kill them without leaving any armor. Chapter 192 CP0 dispatched. Please customize. The guys in the Navy haven't left yet. Do you think we pirates are easy to mess with? If we stop us from entering the New World, we will kill them without leaving any armor. No, the mere Navy. Do you think you can really block the route of the Chambord Islands? I heard that there is also a movement on the side of the four emperors. After all, it is impossible for the four emperors to sit idly by as the Chambord Islands are blocked. Due to various pressures, the Navy headquarters withdrew from the Chambord Islands. Quote. A group of pirates were talking and laughing. This is their first harvest, a victory from the Navy. Looking at the lively scene of a group of pirates, Shachi stood at the front desk, holding a cigarette, protruding a puff of smoke, with a smile on her face. The business finally turned around, although she wasn't very reliant on Barry's source here. But the lively atmosphere, in your own store, will definitely make you feel happy. Moreover, there are many pirates who come here to inquire about the news, and the amount of Bailey paid is not low, so that she can once again save her savings. The heartache that had lost 1.5 billion Barry was gradually forgotten by her. At this time, at the gate, a young man walked step by step, walked to the front desk, sat on a chair, and said with a smile, "Bring me a glass of wine." "What are you doing here?" Shachi's face changed dramatically, her face full of vigilance, and she asked. The person sitting in front of her was naturally Li Ang. In the past few days, Li Ang's life has been extremely comfortable. In addition to drinking in the tavern, he returned to the house and did some indescribable things with Zalulia Palace. At the end of the day, nothing was done, but Barry kept rolling. Population auctions are going on every day. It's just not as large as before. Every day, some small slaves are auctioned off, and part of the berry that was harvested went into Li Ang's pocket, except for those who sold slaves. Li Ang will also take out a part and distribute it to the people under his hands. But in general, it is very easy to get a few million bells a day. After a month, 100 million berries can be easily harvested. Basically, Li Ang's berry is too much to spend. Get 1.5 billion berry from Rayleigh, 100 million berry from Kayabu, and occasionally go to the no-fat zone to restore chaos, and some pirates who don't have long eyes will send him berry to spend. Quote. The visitor is a guest, won't you entertain me? Li Ang looked at Shachi with a smile and said. Give. Shachi casually mixed drinks and handed it to Li Ang without a good face. Suddenly, her eyes twinkled brightly, and she seemed to remember something. She looked at Li Ang and asked, recently, in the Holy Land of Lili's Tianlong people, a big event happened to Mary Joa, do you know? You are very well informed. Li Ang narrowed his eyes slightly and said in admiration. If he wasn't the mastermind, he really didn't know what would have happened to Mary Joa. But since number 7 was put back by him, he naturally had the answer in his heart. Come to think of it, it is absolutely consistent with the news that the Tianlong people were killed. You know what? Shachi's face changed slightly, and she lost her voice. No one should know about her unique news except those from Mary Joa. But why does Li Ang know? It seems that the time to know is earlier than her. I don't know, when did I say I knew? Li Ang smiled, waved his hand, and said slowly. Hearing this, Shachi had nothing to say, everything was just what she thought, and Li Ang did not say that. Chapter 193 Shachi's shock. You guys are really annoying. Shachi took a breath and said with an angry look on her face. You're a lot of age, and you're more angry, you'll grow old quickly, Aunt Shachi. The corners of Li Ang's mouth were slightly raised, and he said with a big laugh. Well. Shachi raised her brows, she was not too young. although she still maintained the state of a middle-aged woman, but in fact, she was no less than 60 years old. Therefore, the issue of age is the last thing she does not want to mention. Unexpectedly, Li Ang chose this matter to talk to her. Aside. Some pirates are somewhat gloating. Who is this kid? How dare he talk to Shachi like that? Does he not want to live? No, there was someone who didn't have long eyes before, who actually dared to molest Shachi. Now it's good. She was beaten and rolled and crawled. Finally, you can leave after paying double the price of the drink. Guess how this kid will be punished. I guess he'll have a broken leg. Quote. Many pirates looked at Li Ang and Shachi and started talking. 010 Shachi's reputation is still quite loud. Without any prestige, how can she deter the group of pirates in the tavern? Therefore, sometimes, the proper display of some strength can ensure the normal operation of the tavern. Shachi's strength is naturally very tyrannical. Many pirates who provoke her. The next day, the corpses of those pirates can be seen on the coast. It is conceivable that many pirates also have respect for her. Strong men and women, will be respected by many people. And now, Li Ang dared to mention the issue of age in front of Shachi, and many pirates had already labeled him, Death. They haven't seen it before. Someone can be presumptuous in front of Shachi's eyes and still be unscathed. I'm really not used to being called auntie by legendary characters. Shachi raised her brows and said coldly. I'm sorry, I'm only in my 20s. The corner of Li Ang's mouth twitched, and Lang Lang smiled. Well. Shachi's eyes became more and more gloomy. As the saying goes, master tricks are fatal. Every word of Li Ang poked into Shachi's heart. If she hadn't been afraid of Li Ang's terrifying strength, she would have smashed Li Ang out long ago. Afterwards, Shachi had a flash of inspiration, looked at Li Ang, and said with a smile, You can hear about Mary Joa. But according to what I have learned, you have been staying in the Chambord archipelago for a while now. Then the question is, since you were all in the Chambord archipelago, where did you get the news? You don't have a source like me. No one can provide you with such top-secret information, but you know it. The source is intriguing. Shachi looked at Li Ang meaningfully, and said with a smile, Isn't it possible that you planned this whole thing? It's a sin. Your brain is really big. Li Ang smiled and took a sip of red wine. Apart from this explanation, what other explanation can you think of to explain what is going on at the moment? You know, I only know the news in a few days. Shachi turned defense into attack, pressing step by step, her eyes focused on Li Ang's. The conversation between the two quickly passed 10 minutes. But there was no result, which made Shachi frustrated. Chapter 193_Shachi's shock. Please customize it. But there was no result, which made Shachi frustrated. This picture really shocked the pirates who were drinking around. This old man is very fierce. He made Shachi vomit blood, and he still looks like a normal person. What is his origin? This is the first time I've seen it. Shachi was so angry that she didn't make a move, but instead greeted and talked to the other party with a smile. This old man is my idol. Please teach me how to do it. Shachi, this tigress, was so crushed that she didn't dare to make a sound. BHBB. Many pirates were shocked and amazed. However, their voices were very subtle, for fear of being heard by Shachi, but they didn't have good fruit to eat. They looked at Li Ang's back, full of admiration. This is one of the few people who angered Shachi, but was able to escape unscathed. They speculate that this is definitely a terrifying big man. Otherwise, how could Shachi be so calm? After so long, she has no intention of doing anything. Mr. Li Ang, your explanation is weak. Shachi looked at Li Ang with a smile, thinking that she was winning. Explain. You misunderstood. Li Ang shook his head and laughed. I don't need to explain at all. What do you say? What does it have to do with me? Anyway, the mouth is on your body. What do you want to say? Can't I stop it? Huh. Shachi snorted coldly, her eyes narrowed, and she secretly scolded Liang for being an old fox with no leaks. Then, she said again, it's okay for you to admit this matter. Anyway, with your ability, you won't care about these things, so why deny it? I'm curious, why do you care so much about this matter? Mary Joa is 108,000 miles away from here, the death of a dragon man, you care so much about who did it. Liang smiled and said, I just want to know if you did this. Shachi continued to ask, without concealing her thoughts at all. The person who delivered the news didn't tell you that Tianlongren died because he was betrayed by his subordinates. What does this have to do with me? Liang said with a smile, without panic, as the saying goes, you can eat indiscriminately, but you can't talk nonsense. Before there is no evidence, what you say is meaningless. Besides, if you add trouble to me, I will very annoying. Quote. You know so much. Shachi's eyes flashed and she whispered. She is now more and more suspicious of Liang, otherwise, how could the other party know so much information? Even the death method of the Tianlong people, who was killed, the other party is clear. In this way, the other party also said that there is no connection, and she would never believe it. You know a lot about each other. After all, you have a lot of connections with the Tianlong people. Liang looked at Shachi, his thoughts moved, and he smiled. What connection can I have with the Draco? I'm just a tavern owner. Shachi's face remained unchanged, and she smiled very relaxedly. Heard. Liang shook his head, smiling unabated, and said bluntly, No, the original Hancock was rescued by you and Rayleigh. It can be seen that you are not simple. Well. Shachi's face changed slightly, she couldn't remember what happened back then. Moreover, there are very few people who know it, only a few people from that year know it. And now, she actually said from Liang's mouth, how could she not be shocked? Chapter 194_The Best of the Best. How old is Liang in front of him? It's been many years since what happened back then. That is to say, when things happened at that time, Liang would not be more than 10 years old at most, but at the age of 10, he already knew about the secret things at that time. In Shachi's understanding, she did not think that a child who was less than 10 years old at that time would know something that was obviously very secret. She and Rayleigh both just offered to help, and this incident did not cause too much waves in the sea, and finally Hancock returned to Daughter Island smoothly. Well, here comes the question. How did Leon know? Thinking of this, Shachi's heart was full of doubts, and she couldn't understand it. This shows that Liang's own sense of mystery is even more evident. Or, Liang, more than just his apparent age. Are you really just a young man in your 20s? Shachi narrowed her eyes slightly and said meaningfully. Of course, otherwise what do you think? The corners of Liang's mouth were slightly raised, and he said lightly. Will he say that he knows everything in this world like the back of his hand? You're really hard to see through. Shachi took a deep breath and said solemnly. Hearing this, Liang said with a smile, Don't you think you have the best information about each other? Then do you know my past history? I don't know, so don't pretend to me that you know everything in the world. Attitude. Quote. Actually, there are many things that I know, but you don't know. For example, something will happen in the future. This thing will sweep the entire sea. What's the matter? Shachi raised her brows and asked. The secret cannot be leaked. This matter will lead to the immediate resignation of one of the 4 emperors. Moreover, the 4 emperors will replace a brand new person. I can assure you of this. But what the matter is, I can't tell you. Liang took a sip of red wine and smiled lightly. The 4 emperors stepped down. Shachi's face changed dramatically, recalling the 4 emperors in the New World. She still couldn't think of which of the 4 emperors was arranged to step down. A redhead with a friendly relationship with Raleigh. Immediately, Shachi looked at Liang suspiciously and asked, How can you know these things? Can you predict the future direction? She had never heard of these things. As I said, the secret cannot be leaked. Li Ang laughed loudly, stood up from his chair, gradually left the pub, and waved his hand. The cost of this glass of wine will be compensated for by the news I gave you just now. Predict the future. Shachi sneered and looked at Li Ang's back. She didn't care about the cost of the glass of wine, but Li Ang's words, which seemed like a joke to her. Will the 4 emperors step down? This is basically impossible. Whether it is red hair or white beard, or Kaido, Charlotte Lingling and others, everyone is an extremely tyrannical and terrifying figure. When such a person steps down, what kind of terrifying opponent does he have to face? And what reason did they have to face such a terrifying opponent? Let me wait and see if your so-called predicting the future is true. Shachi's eyes twinkled, thinking to herself. Of course, her trust in Li Ang's words was only 0.001%. The point is that the fall of the 4 emperors involved too much and too much. Soon. Chapter 194 The Best of the Best, and GT, page 1/2. Please click the next page to continue reading. Soon. After Rayleigh came back, Shachi also told him what Li Ang said. Rayleigh laughed. 4 emperors fall. This is basically impossible. Although this guy Whitebeard is old, he is still far from his lifespan and will not die within 5 years. As for the other 3 and 4 emperors, it is even more so when they are young. If they want to kill them, even the people from the Navy headquarters can't do it. Based on the above points of view, it can be judged that this guy is a drinker. I don't know what he thinks. With billions of bellies in his arms, he actually came up with such a way to drink alcohol. Isn't there any chance? Shachi looked at Rayleigh suspiciously and asked. Probably not at all. Rayleigh nodded solemnly, raised his head, looked up at the sky, and said, their strength is very terrifying, I know very well. The fall of the 4 emperors. This is very difficult to see in my lifetime. If it is true as Li Ang said, the 4 emperors will be in the future. Down soon. I, Rayleigh, can do anything for him. I'll just say, how could the 4 emperors fall? Shachi also smiled and said. The 2 completely ignored Li Ang's words and didn't take it to heart at all. Okay, let's talk about it. What news has the sea so far? Riley laughed, and gradually let go of what had just happened. In his eyes, these things could not attract his attention. There is no other reason. The reason for the downfall of the 4 emperors is too heavy, and each of the 4 emperors represents an extremely terrifying combat power. Unless, there are individual terrorist forces that can suppress the 4 emperors and choose to fight against the 4 emperors. But even the world government and the Navy headquarters will not easily provoke the 4 emperors, and even they cannot afford the consequences of a collision with the 4 emperors. The other side. After Li Ang left the tavern, he walked down the street. 0. Pedestrians came and went, and the number of pirates gradually increased. With the withdrawal of the Navy, the frequency of pirates appearing here is also increasing. There are many pirates with over 100 million hidden in the crowd. They don't want people to find out, and no one can find out their own identities. Boo boo. The phone bug Li Ang carried with him rang, and there was a burst of screams. Disco's distinctly shrill voice filled with respect after dialing the phone bug. My lord, someone has sold a boutique at the auction. I wonder if you are interested. I can guarantee that this is definitely a boutique among the boutiques. Your lord, you will not be disappointed. Slave, it shouldn't be easy to make you admire it so much. Li Ang stood on the spot, looked at the pedestrians coming and going, and asked with a smile. Sir, I don't know if it disturbs your time. You can come and have a look. If you are not satisfied, I would like to pack up and leave. This time I can guarantee that this is the best of the best. Disco was full of confidence and excited. In order to ask Li Ang for credit, he also invested his blood and made a package ticket. Since you recommend it like this, then I will naturally give you face. I hope you don't disappoint me too much. Li Ang said with a smile. After hanging up the phone bug, he glanced at the pedestrians around him with a smile on his face. Seeing and hearing domineering spread. The strength level of almost everyone is presented in his mind. Among these people, there are quite a few, and their strength is not simply a big pirate. Chapter 195_Slave from Daughter Island. The number of pirates in the Chambord Islands has gradually increased, and many places have returned to the right track. The disappearance of the Tianlong people seems to be gradually forgotten. Li Ang's eyes narrowed slightly, with a hint of emotion. In this way, Tianlong people do not seem to be useful big figures. How many days have you been investigating? This has been abandoned. I have to say that the perseverance of the guys in the world government is really too low. Or, because of the death of Mary Jo's Draco, they had to wholeheartedly investigate the death of the Draco. But that matter could never be found on Li Ang. Also, the killer committed suicide. In this way, any clues are meaningless. Investigating that matter can be said to be useless and basically useless. The world government should not give up easily, right? It is difficult to guarantee that no manpower will be dispatched to investigate the case. Li Ang thought to himself, and with a single step, he gradually headed to the location of the auction house. He didn't care much about the follow-up actions of the world government. Even if there is real suspicion on his head, there is no evidence to show this. Before there is no evidence, the world government will not dare to do anything to Li Ang for the time being. Not to mention, the time for the top war is getting closer. At this moment, the Navy headquarters is so annoyed, how could it possibly provoke Li Ang? Once Li Ang joins forces with the four emperors, it will be a nightmare for the Navy headquarters. After half an hour, Li Ang successfully arrived at the gate of the auction. Here, a group of merchants could be seen entering the auction one after another. Some people trade slaves, and some people buy slaves. Not all items in the auction house must be auctioned. If there is enough berry, and the value of the commodity is not high, it can be traded in private. Of course, if the commodity is too cherished, it will drive the interests of the entire auction house, so naturally, it cannot be traded privately, but must be advertised with great fanfare. After attracting more people, the auction will start, and the benefits will be higher. Anyway, everything is in progress for the benefit. The warriors of the giant clan only ask for 3 million berry. A human trafficker pulled a giant warrior and whispered flatteringly, "Go away, this is incredible for me, the daughter of the rich family, 5 million bellies is not a problem, right?" Charles, the captain of the Charles pirates, offered a bounty of 20 million berries, sold slaves, and hoped to get 30 million berries. Quote. An individual trader sells the slaves he brings with him. Li Ang looked at the chaotic group of people, his face was calm, his footsteps moved, and the figure disappeared at the gate. After he left, everyone present came to a realization. Did you see that there was someone here just now? I thought it was a hallucination and he just disappeared all of a sudden. Sure enough, Chambord Islands, Crouching Tiger, Hidden Dragon, I'd better be careful, don't provoke those terrifying big pirates, or you won't even know how to die. Quote. Li Ang didn't know that after he left, it would bring a small sensation to the people here. However, no one knew his identity. As soon as he entered the auction hall, he was greeted by the quiet atmosphere. It was completely different from the turbulent atmosphere outside. This is a place that only the staff are qualified to enter, which is different from the place that looks like a vegetable market outside. What kind of boutique is it? I'm looking forward to it. Chapter 195_Slaves from Daughters Island. NLT, 29 and GT. What kind of boutique is it? I'm looking forward to it. The corners of Li Ang's mouth twitched, and he said to himself with a smile. It shouldn't be easy to make disco so popular. Soon, after turning left and right, he successfully arrived at Disco's office and pushed in the door. Crunch. The door was pushed open. Li Ang saw right in front of him. Inside a huge iron cage in the office, there was a mature woman with blonde hair, wearing a leopard print leather jacket, and her long right leg was wearing black and white striped socks alone. Her mature figure was directly exposed to Li Ang's eyes. This is a very beautiful woman, and she also has a wild nature, like a tiger, like a wolf, her eyes twinkling, with a fierce aura. Sir, BHCD. Seeing Li Ang arriving, Disco quickly got up from the chair, walked to Li Ang's side, and bowed his head respectfully. Is this what you said, the best of the best? Li Ang looked at the beautiful woman in the iron cage and asked with a smile. Yes, sir, you don't know. Her origin is not simple. Disco nodded quickly and explained, Sir, I don't know if you have heard of it, Daughter's Island. Daughter Island. Li Ang looked a little surprised, and couldn't help but ask, You mean, she is from Daughter Island? That is the chassis of Chihuahua. Logically, no one should dare to do something there. It is for this reason that these pure and wild women from Daughter's Island are the objects that men are most eager to conquer. Sir, do you know something? If the women of Daughter's Island are auctioned outside, how much do you think they will sell for? Disco narrowed his eyes slightly and said with a slight smile. Could it be more expensive than a mermaid? Li Ang smiled and said. Hearing this, Disco's face froze, and he smiled bitterly. Of course it can't be compared with a mermaid, but it's easy to sell hundreds of millions of bellies. Especially for a woman like this beautiful flower with a spicy personality, the price is only reasonable. Higher. So, you want to give her to me? Li Ang looked at the golden beauty in the iron cage and asked with a smile. Sir, if you like it, I will give it to you immediately without saying a word. Disco nodded solemnly and said. Dong dong dong. A crisp sound. Inside the iron cage, the blonde beauty gritted her teeth. Her eyes were full of anger. She stared at Li Ang and Disco in front of her, roaring, You damned fellows, Lord Snake will definitely come to save me. When the time comes, I will let you die without a burial. It's not too small. Disco laughed dumbly and sneered, Even if you, Lord Snake, come, in front of our family, you can only kneel and beg for mercy. Ridiculous. The blonde beauty was full of anger and shouted, You wait, soon, your so-called population auction site will be destroyed. Within 3 days, I will kill all of you. Noisy, quiet me down. A bit of gloom appeared on Disco's face, holding a whip, ready to whip the blonde beauty. Stop. The corners of Li Ang's mouth moved slightly, preventing Disco's movements. Sir. Disco looked puzzled, but took a few steps back. At this time, Li Ang walked forward, came to the side of the iron cage, and put his eyes on the blonde beauty in front of him. Looking up close, the surging figure of this blonde beauty is perfectly presented in Li Ang's eyes. But that wasn't what caught his attention. He only felt that this woman, as if he had seen it somewhere. Is it another character from the original book? However, for a while, he couldn't remember the name of this woman. Chapter 196-Margaret. What's your name? Li Ang looked at the blonde beauty and asked with a smile. Huh. The blonde beauty raised her head and snorted coldly, ignoring Li Ang's intentions. There was a wild beast-like aura in her eyes. Obviously, because she hunted a lot, she would have this vicious aura more or less in her body. This kind of breath is also referred to as murderous aura. Really? As Disco said, taming such a woman will greatly increase a man's sense of accomplishment. However, what Disco didn't know was that Li Ang had no interest in the woman in front of him. Taming this kind of woman is not as comfortable as taming the Tianlong people. At best, this kind of woman can only be said to have a more violent personality. But Tianlong people belong to the kind from the inside out, with a sense of nobility. From childhood to adulthood, they have grown up in this environment, which makes Tianlong people have a look of contempt for ordinary people. This kind of noble woman, if the man is tamed, can he better make the man feel his achievements. Even Li Ang had an indescribable joy in his heart after he tamed the Zaluria Palace. My lord asked you something. Disco raised his brows and stared coldly at the blonde beauty, said. He held a wooden thorn whip, and when he whipped it down, his skin might even crack open, revealing blood. But the blonde beauty was not afraid, instead she was confident. You wait, Lord Snake will definitely come back to save me. I will just watch the picture of you being killed by Lord Snake. Hancock. It would be better if she came back. Li Ang's eyes narrowed slightly, and the corners of his mouth raised an arc. The female Emperor Hancock, who is known as the world's first human and peerless beauty, if she can make these women feel the heart, the sense of accomplishment is no less than that of the Tianlong people. Moreover, Li Ang also saw Hancock's face when he collided with the Navy headquarters. Obviously, being called the world's first human peerless beauty is not in vain. With that appearance, Li Ang couldn't find anyone who could match it. Even the beauties like Robin and Nami would be a little overshadowed if they stood by the female Emperor Hancock. The scary thing is that the face of the female Emperor Hancock is very stunning, and her figure is plumper than Robin, almost reaching the pinnacle of a woman. He is almost 2 meters tall, and his long legs make people linger. It can be said that every position of the female Emperor Hancock's body seems to be deliberately created by God, perfect and impeccable, flawless. Such a woman, even Li Ang, was a little moved. You are from Daughter Island, so I have something to ask you. Li Ang's eyes flickered and he smiled. Before you were arrested, did a man named Luffy appear on Daughter Island? Luffy. The blonde beauty frowned and didn't answer. When was she caught? Li Ang looked at Disco and asked. A few days ago. Disco took a deep breath and said slowly. A few days ago, it stands to reason that Luffy should have landed on the Daughter Island. But seeing, this blonde beauty from Daughter Island seems to have never heard of this name. Li Ang used the domineering look of knowledge, and the domineering look of knowledge spread, covering the blonde beauty. But in the end, it came back in vain. There was no impression of Luffy in the head of the blonde beauty. In other words, Luffy didn't arrive at Daughter's Island at all. I don't know. The blonde beauty said bluntly with an expressionless face. Her hands and feet were tied with chains, unable to move an inch. Chapter 196_Margaret, NGT, page 1/2. Please click the next page to continue reading. NLT, 31 NGT. Her hands and feet were tied with chains, unable to move an inch. In addition, the existence of T-Ling made it impossible for her to escape easily. The strength of Daughter Island's fighters is naturally unquestionable, especially that archery, the domineering archery with its own armed colors, is their unique talent. But without swords, their strength would drop dozens of times. It is basically impossible for the blonde beauty in front of her to break the iron cage without arrows and weapons. That's strange. Li Ang's mouth moved slightly and said lightly. Luffy didn't arrive at the Chambord Islands. Is it because of him that the original things have changed? However, come to think of it, this change will not affect the overall view. As long as the people of the Blackbeard Pirates are still in action, there will be another big battle about to break out. No matter where Luffy is, as long as this battle will break out, he will do his best to rush to the battlefield. Thinking of this, Li Ang put his eyes back on the blonde beauty. For a while, a name appeared in his head, and he said with a smile, "Your name, Margaret." Well. Blonde beauty shrank her pupils and blurted out, "You, who are you?" It's really you. Li Ang laughed, and the memory in his head gradually became clear. Margaret, in the original book, is the first female warrior that Luffy encounters on Daughter Island. The presence is not high, but not low either. After a while, Li Ang finally remembered her name. Who are you? You know my name so well. Margaret was a little panicked, her expression was full of fear, she resisted the fear in her heart and questioned. She would never have imagined that the enemy knew her name. When a stranger calls out his name, naturally, he is very scared. 0. It was as if all the secrets in his heart had been seen through. Open the iron cage. Li Ang looked at Disco and said slowly. Sir, her strength is very strong. When we arrested her, it took a lot of effort. Although it will not affect you very much, please be careful. Disco looked nervous and had to remind. Don't worry, with me, she can't make any big waves. Liang patted Disco on the shoulder and said with a smile. Yes, my lord. Disco nodded, and he naturally had a deep understanding of Liang's strength. It's just a female warrior on Daughter Island. It doesn't exist if you want to be presumptuous in front of Liang. Even if the king of Daughter Island came over, he had to lie down obediently in front of Liang. Crunch. The iron door was pulled open. Margaret was a little stunned. She looked at Liang with her beautiful eyes, puzzled. How was it so good, that she actually let her out? How is this going? Could it be that after knowing her name, she felt remorse? Are you afraid? Thinking of this, Margaret said, Now, do you know that you are afraid? Catch me, and Our Lady Snake will arrive immediately. At that time, you will suffer. Still talking about your snake princess? Liang laughed dumbly, shook his head and said, Then you know, who is the person standing in front of you. NLT, 32 and GT. Chapter 197_Riley for Love. Who are you? Margaret frowned, looked at Liang, and asked. She always felt that the man in front of her was too mysterious. Not only does he know so many things, but his identity also seems unusual. Ordinary pirates will naturally be frightened when they hear the name of Chiwahai. At least, in a short moment, the real emotions in their eyes will reveal the most real emotional fluctuations in their hearts. But she didn't see any fear in the person in front of her. Not even the slightest bit. Open your ears and listen. Disco stepped forward with a proud face, raised his head, and said bluntly, The person standing in front of you is famous, Mr. Liang. Liang. Margaret's pupils shrank, she gasped, and her heart skipped a beat. Liang can be said to be on the sea, and no one knows it. Even if she stayed at her daughter's island, she knew very well how terrifying a big man Liang was. Before 180, she compared her own Lady Snake Princess with the legendary Liang. As a result, she herself felt terrified. Lord Snake G's influence, strength, etc. in all aspects are far inferior to Liang, and the two are not on the same level at all. Therefore, when she heard that the person in front of her was Liang, her mood also fell to the bottom. You turned out to be Liang. Margaret took a deep breath and stared at Liang, said. Isn't it like? Liang smiled and asked. The portrait on the bounty list was indeed like you. It's just that after I haven't recalled it for a long time, I have forgotten the appearance. Margaret's mood became extremely heavy and depressed. She now hopes that Hancock will not come here, otherwise, not only will he not be able to save her, but on the contrary, even Hancock will be caught. This is the strength of one's own power to resist the terrifying existence of the Navy headquarters. In fact, even the world government can't do anything, as if it is a godlike figure. In the face of this terrifying existence, no one can help her. Immediately, Margaret seemed to accept her fate. Slumped on the ground, her face was ashen, her eyes were dull, she lowered her head and looked at the floor, motionless. This loses the fighting spirit. Disco sneered, I don't know who said that just now, let his own snake princess come over and put us to death. Now, do you really think that there are still people in this world who can save you? Stop joking. Stand up. Liang looked down at Margaret condescendingly and said lightly. My lord told you to stand up. Disco said quickly. Margaret gritted her teeth, stood up with difficulty, raised her head, looked at Liang with those stubborn eyes, and seemed to regain her confidence in herself. What are you going to do to me? Margaret looked at Liang and asked. No, I'm not interested in you. On the contrary, I'm very interested in your Lord Snake G. If possible, it would be good to talk to her about life ideals in the room. Liang said with a smile. Margaret couldn't hear the deep meaning of these words. she just felt that the person in front of her should want to conspire against Lord Snake Princess. She reprimanded coldly, "Impossible, Lord Snake G won't be fooled." "Beauty, what you said just now contradicts itself." Li Ang smiled at the angry Margaret and explained, "Just now you said she came back to save you, but now, you said she wouldn't be fooled. Feelings, the direction of things in this world depends on what you said." "You." Margaret's face was furious, she gritted her teeth, and could not wait to rush up to bite Li Ang. But she also knew that she couldn't get close to this kind of existence, so she could only suppress the restlessness in her heart. "See." Li Ang waved his hand and said, "Lock her up, I have no interest in her. Just use her as a bait and see if it can lead to the legendary Empress. That's the most important thing." "Yes, my lord." Disco nodded with admiration on his face. This is the adult he admires. How can you be interested in ordinary daughters of the island? How are these women worthy of the status of adults? Only the king of Daughters Island can barely become an adult woman. Chapter 197_Rayleigh for Love. And LT, 33 and GT. Only the king of Daughters Island can barely become an adult woman. Immediately, his admiration for Li Ang was like a surging river. "Go back to me, it's useless to ask you now. You are just a bait, and the big fish is behind you. Now you go back and stand obediently for me." Disco pointed to the iron cage, his face was calm, and he said coldly, "No, you can't do that." Margaret's eyes were red, she stared at Li Ang, and roared. She was very worried that once Lord Snake G came to save her, it would really be a self-inflicted trap. Once Lord Snake is captured, there will be no leader in Daughters Island. Coupled with the disappearance of the deterrent power of Chihuahua, the Navy also chose to attack the Daughter Island. In this way, the disaster of Daughters Island will follow. All of this was caused by her, which she naturally couldn't bear. If these things really happened, she alone would be the culprit. Thinking of this, Margaret knelt on the ground and cried, "No, I beg you, I can be a cow and a horse for you, don't do anything to Lord Snake." She has no doubt that Li Ang in front of her has the power to kill Hancock. After all, this is a real horror figure. Who said he was going to do something to her? Corner of Li Ang's mouth twitched and smiled, "I just want to talk to her, and I won't kill her. What are you worried about?" After he finished speaking, he looked at the disco and said, "Lock her back." At this time, Margaret's expression subsided, her face was dull, and she walked back to the iron cage step by step. The door of the iron cage was locked, and she could only hold the iron rod of the iron cage by herself, watching the backs of Li Ang and Disco drifting away. After leaving the office, Leon and Disco were walking down the corridor. Disco introduced Li Ang's auction market and earnings in the past few days. In 4 days, no less than 100 slaves were sold, and among them, a total of 200 million berries were harvested. This berry has already deducted the principal spent on purchasing slaves, the wages of the staff, etc. In other words, this is the amount of benefits Li Angchun has received. "You take half." Li Ang looked at the disco and said lightly, "My lord, I can't do it." Disco was nervous and shook his head quickly. "If you want to take it, where's the nonsense coming from?" Li Ang glanced at Disco and said bluntly, "Thank you, sir." Disco was full of excitement, bowed his head, and said respectfully, "You're welcome. In the future, you will need to take more care of the auction house." Li Ang patted hungry Disco on the shoulder and laughed. "Don't worry, my lord, I will do my best." Disco nodded solemnly and said, "Heard." 0.1 Auction with a smile. Li Ang will naturally not be stingy with rewards for those who have made contributions to the auction house. In this way, people will work harder. If you just rely on fame, you won't be able to sustain the popularity for long. Only interests can keep people motivated forever. At this time, but just when he walked out of the gate of the auction house. In the front position, an old man with silver hair came gradually, After he saw Liang, he showed an embarrassed smile. Really? Liang's eyes flickered, a little surprised. Mr. Liang, to be honest, I'm here next time to ask for something. Rayleigh scratched his hair, hesitant, but still said. What's the matter? Liang smiled meaningfully and looked at Rayleigh. For a while, Rayleigh felt that what he was thinking was seen through in an instant. He took a deep breath and said seriously, the purpose of my trip is to come here for the Slave of the Daughter Island. And LT, 34 and GT. Chapter 198-another condition. Slave of Daughter Island, you came for her. Liang was a little surprised, and took a deep look at Rayleigh with an intriguing expression on his face. He didn't know whose orders Rayleigh had been given. However, since it was for the Slave of Daughter's Island, then presumably, the people on Daughter's Island have already taken relevant measures and actions. That's right. Riley nodded solemnly and said, I know that when someone sells her to you, you have already paid a certain amount of Bailey. Here, if possible, I am also willing to buy her out of Bailey, what do you think? Then make a price. Liang thought for a moment, looked calm, and smiled. 100 million bergs. Riley thought for a moment and said slowly, this amount is already a very considerable amount. There are very few female slaves, and even the most beautiful female slaves can't sell for this price. As Riley said, why? Because, in this world, there will never be a shortage of women. In particular, there are 17 beautiful women. There are a lot of them. Therefore, the larger the quantity, the lower the price will naturally be. This is equivalent to the truth that what is rare is more expensive. If the number of beautiful women is small, the price will naturally be very high. But the world is full of beautiful women, and there is no shortage of beautiful women at all, so naturally there will not be too amazing numbers in terms of prices. Unless, this beautiful woman, has some kind of peculiar ability. The unique place of the mermaid is because of the rarity of the race. And the women of Daughter's Island have the desire to make men want to conquer. In general, 100 million berry, the price is not low. Under normal circumstances, most will choose to sell her. However, Liang's purpose is not for berry. He wants to catch a bigger fish, so naturally it is impossible to sell Margaret as a slave so easily. 100 million Bailey is still too little for him. Too little. Liang shook his head and said bluntly, she has cost us a lot of manpower and material resources. If it is only 100 million Baileys, we will lose relatively. We will definitely not do any loss-making business. 150 million berries. Rayleigh took a deep breath, looked at Liang, and spoke again. It can be seen that he is bound to gain 50 million berry all at once. The Slave of Daughter Island, he must be rescued. If it wasn't for the owner of the auction house, it was Liang. He personally took the initiative to break into the auction house and bring Margaret out directly. But the owner of the auction house was Liang. Under the shock of Liang, Rayleigh did not dare to be so blatant and forcefully enter the auction house. This was hitting Liang in the face, and the consequences were quite serious. It's still not enough. Liang's mouth moved slightly, shook his head, and refused again. 150 million berry, buying a soldier from Daughter Island, I think, this shouldn't be too much. Rayleigh frowned and said. It's not too much, but she is the only exception. Liang nodded in agreement and said, when we captured her, we lost 200 experienced and capable people. Their deaths are naturally not measured by money. In addition, there were 2 lost ships. Quote, cannonballs, guns, etc. It took a lot of money to escape the tracking of the people on Daughter's Island. And finally, they arrived at the Chambord Point smoothly. The twists and turns on the way, the journey is difficult and dangerous. You can imagine. Liang talked eloquently, anyway, it's all about editing hard. In order to increase the price, the more heavily edited, the more room to increase the price. Rayleigh's eyes flickered brightly, and he said solemnly, 200 million Burgess. Chapter 198 _ another condition. And LT, 35 and GT. Rayleigh's eyes flickered brightly, and he said solemnly, 200 million Burgess. This price is his limit. If he goes up further, he can judge that Li Ang does not want to hand over the female warrior from Daughter Island to them so easily. In this way, no matter how high the price they give, Li Ang cannot be satisfied. In this regard, Rayleigh is like a mirror. It's a little bit more. Li Ang smiled, and with a flash of inspiration, he suggested, well, I'll give you another condition. As long as this condition is fulfilled, I'll let her go intact. What conditions? Rayleigh asked with confusion on his face. This time, you didn't propose it on your own initiative. Li Ang narrowed his eyes slightly and said with a smile. Obviously, Rayleigh's dispatch was not intentional. It was someone else who asked him to come forward. It's obvious who this person is. What do you mean? Riley raised his brows and asked again. He had an ominous feeling in his heart, but he couldn't say it. I mean, who asked you to buy that slave? Is it Sha-Chi? She probably wouldn't take the initiative to ask you to do it. In other words, there is another person. Quote. Li Ang took a few steps and came to Rayleigh, saying. I admit, as you said, there is another one, but does this have anything to do with your condition? Riley nodded and asked. Li Ang said, my condition is to communicate with her in person. If it is possible, everything will be fine. Is there something wrong with your communication with him? Besides, I'm also very worried. Rayleigh looked at Li Ang suspiciously and said. Li Ang's strength, even he can't hold back. If something goes wrong during the conversation, I'm afraid, even if he explodes with all 067 strength, he will not be able to recover. If this situation can be avoided, it should be avoided as much as possible. Then there's no talk. Li Ang waved his hand and smiled lightly. After he finished speaking, he moved his footsteps and was about to leave here. Wait a minute. Seeing that Li Ang was about to leave, Rayleigh quickly stopped and said, it's not completely impossible, I can talk to her and see what she means. If she agrees, I naturally have no opinion. Well, talk to her and think about it. Let her find me in a house 200 meters south of the auction house. That's where I live. After Li Ang said this, he turned his head and left. Obviously, the person who came to rescue Margaret was Hancock, the female emperor of one of the seven seas. Thinking of this, Li Ang's mood became a little surging. This is a rare opportunity. If he can capture the heart of the Empress, Li Ang can really enjoy the love of the most beautiful woman in the world. This feeling is far from being expressed in words. Looking at the back of Li Ang leaving, Rayleigh turned around and returned to Sha-Chi's tavern. There, Hancock was waiting to hear from him. That's right. As Li Ang guessed, no one would come to rescue Margaret except Hancock. And LT, 36 and GT. Chapter 199_Meet Hancock. Sha-Chi's ripping off. Inside the hall. Sha-Chi held a cigarette and looked at Rayleigh with no expression on her face, and asked, so, he must be released by Hancock himself. Yes. Riley nodded, sat on a chair, held a glass of wine, took a sip, and said truthfully. In addition to the two, there was a beautiful and tall woman standing aside, lost in thought. She has long black hair with a G hairstyle, dark blue eyes, a pair of snake-shaped earrings, a tall stature, and a split cheongsam. Those slender and white long legs, coupled with delicate facial features, made everyone pale. One of the seven Wuhei under the king, the Empress Hancock. A delicate face and a perfect figure make her stand on the throne of the #1 beauty of mankind. Hancock, what do you think? Sha-Chi looked at Hancock and asked. You can't go to the meeting alone. Standing beside Hancock, a short old woman shook her head and said quickly. She is the mother-in-law who assisted Hancock. She felt very uneasy about Hancock going to talk to Li Ang alone, so she tried to avoid this situation. Otherwise, with Li Ang's terrifying strength, no one will be able to stop Hancock when the time comes. This is the worst-case scenario. Once Hancock is caught, no one can save her. Daughter Island is headless, and with Hancock's silence and disappearance, all forces will stare at Daughter Island, and a catastrophe will follow. Therefore, if Hancock really decides to talk to Liang alone, it also means that there is a 50% chance that it will bring the possibility of ruin to his daughter. For a female warrior, my mother-in-law would never allow Hancock to do such a ridiculous act. I saw him when we were fighting in the G3 branch. So, I thought, I could go and talk to him. Rayleigh, where's the address? Hancock looked at Rayleigh, his delicate face without any emotional fluctuations. No. Mother-in-law's face changed greatly, and she hurriedly said, Hancock, you must focus on the overall situation. If you have an accident, what will you do on Daughter Island? With my brief understanding of him, it can be judged that he will not do anything to me. Hancock's beautiful eyes flickered, and his heart felt a little excited. This made her a little unbelievable. Feelings, are you so willing to see each other? Thinking of this, her pretty face flashed with a hint of crimson. Could it be that you can do this with your own judgment? This will harm the entire Daughter Island. Hancock, as the king of your daughter's arrival, you must be responsible for the entire Daughter Island. The mother-in-law gritted her teeth and insisted on her inner thoughts. No need to say more, I have made up my mind. Hancock raised his brows and said bluntly. At this time, Rayleigh and Shachi were unable to interject at all. They can only wait for Hancock's own determination, and if the other party disagrees, they can't say anything. No. Why does my mother-in-law still want to stop it? But Hancock was very straightforward, stunned the mother-in-law with a knife, looked at Shachi, and said, please take good care of her. Don't worry. Shachi nodded and said. Immediately, Hancock looked at Rayleigh and asked, where is he waiting for me? A house 200 meters south of the population auction. Riley told Hancock truthfully according to the address given by Liang before. After he finished speaking, he thought for a while and smiled bitterly, I won't accompany you there. Even if I go there, it won't help. Everything depends on your own ability. If the battle breaks out, I can't help you. Chapter 199 Meeting with Hancock. NLT, 37 and GT. After he finished speaking, he thought for a while and smiled bitterly, I won't accompany you there. Even if I go there, it won't help. Everything depends on your own ability. If the battle breaks out, I can't help you. I know. Hancock nodded solemnly and said. Recalling the scene when Liang and the Navy headquarters clashed, she shuddered. This is a truly terrifying powerhouse, not something she can contend against alone. Even with Rayleigh, it is impossible to defeat the opponent. Afterwards, Rayleigh and Shachi watched Hancock leave with worried expressions. Hopefully, it won't fall apart. Shachi lost her eyes and whispered to herself. ... In the hall. Liang was sitting on the sofa. As for Zaluria Palace, he had already been tamed and obedient, and he had no idea of escaping in the first place. Using the ultimate domineering arrogance, Liang can check the psychological activities of Zaluria Palace at any time. After these days of observation, he found that Zaluria Palace had no intention of leaving this place at all. Instead, she fell in love with this place from the bottom of her heart. In this regard, Liang's sense of accomplishment naturally rose steadily. This is a dragon man. The sense of accomplishment brought by taming a Tianlong person is self-evident. Dong dong dong. Just then, the door was knocked. Liang came back to his senses, glanced at the location of the gate, and said lightly, come in. Crunch. After the door was opened, a tall and slender woman wearing a slit-style cheongsam took a pair of long white legs and walked step by step. She had a perfect figure and a delicate face, which made people linger. Immediately, Liang resolved her identity, showed a smile, and said, Hancock, you are still here. Liang. Hancock looked at Liang, feeling very depressed. Of course, there are still some small excitement in the heart, but they are perfectly concealed by her. Sit down. Li Ang pointed to the empty seat on the sofa beside him and smiled. Good. Hancock did not refuse. A pair of straight and slender jade legs walked to Li Ang's position, arrived at the sofa, and sat down slowly, with a very elegant posture. A gust of fragrant wind blows. Li Ang closed his eyes slightly, took a deep breath, and felt the smell carefully, which made him feel full of energy for a while. Approaching Li Ang at close range, Hancock's pretty face didn't change much, but the movement Zhao's was a little stiff, and the motionless one seemed like a statue. Sitting on the sofa, the split cheongsam showed Hancock's figure, and the two groups of Uxiang seemed to be breaking the cheongsam, and the waves were rough, making women jealous. Li Ang's eyes were fixed on Hancock's face. His skin was as jade, white and flawless, pure as snow, and his facial features were so delicate that he couldn't find any flaws at all. This is the most beautiful woman created by God. Whether it is body, appearance, or every aspect, it is quite perfect. The atmosphere fell silent. Li Ang didn't speak first, and Hancock didn't speak either. She lowered her head and looked at the floor. Her breathing became a little messy. In the face of Li Ang, most people could not keep a calm mind. In this quiet atmosphere, the fragrance in the air reverberated in Li Ang's nose, making him close his eyes slightly and feel it carefully. Chapter 200 Heart is moving. What do you want to talk to me about? For a long time, Hancock couldn't stand the quiet atmosphere, and Li Ang beside him was even more unscrupulous. Breathing the body fragrance conveyed by her, he always felt unnatural. She blushed slightly, looked at Li Ang, and asked the other party's intentions. Just talk about it, and I won't eat you. Li Ang opened his eyes and smiled. How can you let people go? Hancock bit his red lips and asked in a low voice. Release. Simple. Li Ang smiled, held the phone bug, and dialed the disco phone bug. Boo boo. Sir. Disco's voice came out, full of respect. Let go. Li Ang's mouth moved slightly and said very calmly. Sir, who is it? The female warrior of Daughter Island. Let her go. And, let them see with their own eyes that we have kept our promises. In the end, Li Ang hung up the phone bug and smiled at Hancock, who was dumbfounded. Today, Hancock can't come back to his senses. What's the situation? She just came here and did nothing, and Li Ang let him go. Do you really have such a big face? Or, is his charm really so huge that even Li Ang can't resist it? Redness appeared on Hancock's delicate face, which was surprisingly a little twisted. What's wrong? Li Ang looked at Hancock's pretty face and asked with a smile, does it feel very unreal? Yeah. Hancock nodded lightly, his expression turning 180 degrees. Just now, she still had a lot of hostility towards Li Ang. But after this phone call, her hostility towards Li Ang was directly reduced to zero. She released the people on her side without costing anything. At least, in this way, her favorability for Li Ang has skyrocketed. In addition, in the previous battle in the naval branch, she was deeply impressed by Li Ang, and in her heart, Li Ang's figure was also left. The combination of various factors made her feel an inexplicable emotion towards Li Ang now. She didn't even know what she thought about Li Ang. Hate it. This feeling has never appeared. Fear. Naturally, it is a person who faces Li Ang more or less with this kind of emotion in his heart. Hancock, who was extremely entangled in his heart, became more and more ruddy on his pretty face. On his delicate face, the white inside was rosy, like a ruby, which was incomparably beautiful. Bhbi, what a goblin. Li Angren didn't sigh and looked at Hancock's pretty face. I have to admit that Hancock's beauty is already #1 on the list of women in the world. Even the rumored mermaid princess, in Li Ang's eyes, is not more beautiful than Hancock. In addition to Hancock's delicate face, her height of nearly 2 meters makes her figure more perfect. With a height of close to 2 meters, one can imagine how long a pair of straight long legs are. Sitting on the sofa alone, the exposed white jade legs are already intoxicating. For leg control, Hancock's legs are definitely the most beautiful things in the world. I'll go first. Hancock felt a little flustered, and quickly stood up, ready to leave. Don't talk to me. Li Ang directly stretched out his hand, grabbed Hancock's slender hand, and smiled. Chapter 200 _ The heart is moving, please customize it. And GT, page 1/2, please click the next page to continue reading. And LT, 39 and GT. Li Ang directly stretched out his hand, grabbed Hancock's slender hand, and smiled. Icy cold and soft to the touch. Hancock's fingertips are long and slender, and they feel wonderful to the touch. In an instant, Hancock's body trembled and his body stiffened. The temperature from the palm of her hand made her whole delicate face even more flushed, like the sunset on the horizon, reddish half of the sky. The neck like a white swan was covered with blood, and it was bright red. Sit down. Li Ang pulled Hancock and pulled him back. Hancock sat on the sofa again, with his head down, his fingertips swaying constantly. His heart was numb, and he didn't know what he was thinking. But she could see on her face that she was extremely upset. And Li Ang held Hancock's hand, not letting go. The two were so silent. Hancock was extremely nervous. Not only did he not resist Li Ang holding her hand, but on the contrary, she was still a little excited. Do you really like him? With a swish, Hancock's eyes turned, and white smoke was coming from his head. She fell into her own reverie world, and she even thought about the scene of marrying Li Ang and wearing a white wedding dress. The more she thought about her, the more confused her head became, and her delicate and pretty face was full of blood. However, people are not ready yet. Is it really okay to get married so soon? Are you going to have a baby for Mr. Li Ang? Still decided. Hancock's beautiful eyes were absent-minded, shyly twisted, his right hand held Li Ang's palm, a smile appeared on the corner of his mouth, and he smirked. What's wrong? Li Ang looked at Hancock beside him and asked with a smile. Ah. Hancock was startled, covered his face, and said quickly, Nothing, where did you just say? I'm talking about you. Li Ang looked at Hancock's cute and panicked appearance, with a smile on his face, and gradually approached. Between breaths, they can slap each other on the face. At this moment, Hancock's mood was beyond words. Mei closed slightly, her long eyelashes trembled, showing her inner tension. A fragrance flowed slowly from her body, spreading all around. Li Ang took a deep breath. This unique fragrance was the first time he felt it on Hancock's body. Getting closer and closer to Hancock's face. At close range, Li Ang and Hancock's bodies are inevitably in contact, and feeling the softness of the two groups, Li Ang has to admit that this body is the most perfect woman he has ever seen. Take a peck. Hancock opened his eyes, and the beautiful eyes were full of shyness, with various unspeakable emotions. After a minute, Li Ang wiped the red mark on the corner of his mouth, looked at the beautiful Hancock in front of him, and pursed his lips. The sweet taste is unforgettable. Hancock's eyes were blurred, leaning on Li Ang's shoulders, his whole body was weak. Li Ang took advantage of the situation and spread out his hands, holding Hancock's weak body like water into his arms, as if holding a ball of cotton, without any weight at all. Furthermore, the position of the chest, the soft touch, made Li Ang reluctant to let go of his hands. Ta-ta-ta. At this time, there was a sound of footsteps. From the room, a woman in white clothes walked out, revealing her white shoulders. At this moment, Shalulia Palace, who had just woken up, rubbed her eyes and walked into the hall. At the same time, she saw the picture of Li Ang holding Hancock in his arms. Her beautiful eyes widened, she didn't feel sleepy, and she lost her voice. Sir.